and this Monday is Mr. Alan Moulder. Alan, how are you, sir? Oh, have you frozen? You're there, yes?
Yes,
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm
Well,
here.
excellent. All right, we froze. It's got to be something. I think our audio's working this week, but you just had a little freeze up there. So you are at your assault and battery complex in London?
I am indeed, yes, in my room, my little garden
Fantastic.
shed.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I've met you once before while you were working on a Wolf Mother
That's right.
record through our mutual friend Joe Barisi, who was engineering with you, and I forced him to let me come to Sound City so I could meet you.
Oh, I didn't realize
Oh
that.
God,
That's
yes,
so,
yeah. And he kept saying, "Well,
so
hold on, no,
humble.
not tonight, not." And then there was like the perfect night. Come on down, and then I bent your ear about Swervedriver. So that's what we're going to do now. We're just going to talk about Swervedriver for hours. No, we're not. We'll get to Swervedriver definitely. So
Okay.
I like to structure these chronologically, mostly because I love getting the story of how people got into this, and I think like you're one of God. It must be 10 people who sort of saw a studio and thought, "Oh, I think I'm going to do that." But but I want to start because first of all, you are from Boston, but you're from the actual Boston, not that startup thing in the States, right?
The Boston I'm from isn't very startup, no. Boston and Lincolnshire, that's right.
And you did you grow up playing an instrument like from a very early age, or how did you come to playing? Because you were in a ton of bands, right?
Not a ton. I was in some local bands. I played guitar, and as usual, you think, oh, one day you're going to make it. And then I realized one day I wasn't going to make it. I think it's because I was in these bands were kind of doing our indie thing, and then I heard the Smiths and realized Johnny Marr was younger than me and considerably better. So I just thought, forget it. And I'd been in this demo, and I just thought, I love this place. No windows, flashing lights on the desk, or all the lights, the frivolous stuff that gets you into it. I just thought this looks like a lot more fun, so I kind of got into it that way.
Right, but I mean, it took you a while, right? Because you actually went to Trident and you were there
Yeah,
for a little bit and then left to be in a
I
band,
went.
correct?
Yeah, I went to Trident when I was 18, I think 18, and I was there for a month. And this was in the still in the 70s. So, but it was Trident was doing like a lot of disco and stuff at that time. So it was still like they it was still owned by the original owners, the Sheffield brothers who owned it. And I was still in a band in Lincolnshire, which I'd got one gig that I was going to do. The last gig, we played our own stuff and we'd sold the tickets. And when I got the job, when they amazingly gave me the job, I said, look, I've got this one date in December that I really need to take off. Can that be arranged? And they said, yeah, sure. And then it came to the date, and the guy said, no, you can't have the time off. You're not allowed to be in a band. The guy who owned it. And I said, you said I could. And he said, no, you can't. You have to choose. Despite the fact I said this will be the last one. I said, no, you have to choose. So I said, okay, I choose. I'm out.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I left, and then kept thinking, what the fuck was I thinking? As I was working for the Ministry of Agriculture. Uh,
Well, researching plant diseases.
yes, that's right.
So did you have any kind of background in that, or is this just some
I had
random
A
job?
biology, that's it. But in Boston, Lincolnshire, there weren't many applicants for the job. So I got in kind of an assistant scientific officer, kind of on the low grade. And it started getting to the point where I was probably going to be promoted and
Right.
moved. And I thought, I don't want that. So I remember I went into my boss's office and called Trident, said, any chance I can get an interview? And I got an interview and went. And this is unheard of. When I went the first time, there's this engineer there called Stewart Shaw, who was really nice to me. And he bought the studio in the end. He bought it off the Sheffield brothers, him and another couple of guys. And I had an interview with him, and I said, I'm thinking about getting back into the studio business, be interested in a job. He said, what sort of position you were looking for? And I said, T-boy, which is like run. We called them T-boys in those days, and they're runners now. And he said, oh, we can give you a job as an assistant. Which...
Okay.
So I started on December the 2nd, 1983, and turned up on the first day at 9 o'clock in the morning, left the next day at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Do you remember what that session was?
Like a Spear of Destiny.
Spear of Destiny.
A band called Spear of Destiny. And we were doing, they covered one of their songs called The Original Sin. I know it's the first time I'd ever seen a Linn drum, and they triggered drum samples from the AMS.
Right.
Which when I saw that, it was like, this is sorcery. I can't believe you can do this. So I had a fantastic 24 hours, went home absolutely shot. And, that was it. I was in. I knew what to expect from the first time I'd been there as a T-boy. But it was a different atmosphere because different owners. And in the 70s time, I'd be sent out for a sandwich or something, come back, and the whole atmosphere of the studio changed. And you could tell as you walked in the front door. Said, what's going on? What's wrong? Or the main monitors in the remix room are down. And it kind of...
Frozen.
It was much more intense than kind of the technical kind of business side, more intense.
We lost you there for a second.
I think I've frozen.
Yeah, you're back now. I think the internet was better when that door was open,
okay,
to be honest.
Okay.
Oh, frozen. Yep, there you are.
Frozen.
No, you got me now?
There we go.
All right. I have a feeling. I think the internet might have been better when that door was open. I don't know if that's possible.
Well, the door next door?
Yeah.
What door?
Did a door close right before we actually went live? I'm making that up. I heard a door.
Open. Hang on a sec.
We'll try it. This is the way these shows go.
We did. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the way these go. I mean, the fact that we have audio is like a huge bonus. So that's all fine. So, yeah, I mean, you must have missed...
It's better than visual.
You missed quite the transition from the disco era to the kind of programmed... I mean, even with the Linn drumming, but basically to a rock era again.
Well, yeah, and Trident, when I went back, it wasn't the glorified studio that it was in the 70s. It was much more run down, and we were kind of hanging on by a limb, really, of paying the bills, and it was much more budget. So you got a lot more bands going in, like Flood. I remember Flood was doing the birthday Bad Seeds there and things like that. So you got a lot of much better bands rather than which were much more my street anyway. But I basically wanted to go to Trident because I thought Echo and the Bunnymen recorded there. And that was the reason I wanted to be there.
Right. Well, and it was kind of a ridiculous crew of people when you showed up too, right?
When I was there for 4 years. Flood was the head honcho. Then we had Spike Stent, Chenzo Townsend, a guy called Paul Corkett, and Steve Osborne. So that was quite a lot for 4 years. And there were others who went on to do well as well. Tim Widener went on to be Trevor Horn's engineer.
Right.
I apologize if I've messed anyone about. Anybody out?
No, but I mean, it's just sort of amazing. And because when we talked to Nick Launay, who obviously was at Townhouse at the same time, it's that same thing. It's like everybody there went on to continue to make records. It wasn't though there was one star engineer, like everybody did.
It was strange. We all got on really well too. Everyone kind of, I think the owners were quite fickle or quite harsh. The staff stuck together to look after each other.
Right.
Flood like the big daddy kind of thing. People came to for his sage advice.
Well, and so you worked with him pretty early on, right? I mean, right when you got back.
Yeah. We clicked. We got the same taste in music, and we clicked very early. You know, we got on very well. So if ever I could be on his session, I'd be on his session.
Right. And obviously, the Jesus and Mary Chain Psycho Candy record was that, how early was that once you got back in there?
Well, we didn't do that record. We did one track on it that
right.
It was post some Psycho Candy.
Oh, right. Okay.
We did a song called Some Candy Talking, which Vlad engineered, and I was the assistant. And that later got put on the Psycho Candy album.
Thus my confusion.
Wasn't part of the original recording. That was originally done at Southern Studios.
Right.
So yeah.
But I loved your description of that band was musical violence. There was musical violence in there.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's what definitely drew me to it, I think. And the melody. I love that band. They were my favorite band at the time. I couldn't believe I was working with them.
Right. I mean, so that was pretty amazing to show back up at a place that had been doing disco. But did you know sort of the clients they'd had? I mean, other than Echo and the Bunnymen, or did you just familiar Echo? I'm going.
There was a magazine, I can't remember what it was called, that used to have like studio gossip, and so I'd see who was in there from that. And I saw this name Flood, and Peace for some reason hated him, so he painted him out to be a devil. Really, this guy. So I kind of knew the sort of bands was the Batcave albums and a lot of kind of gothy bands. I think Soft Cell used to record there because Soft Cell's record label, Some Bizarre, was on the second floor. So you'd have all these goths milling around reception. It was, and every time it was Mark Harmon's birthday, the whole courtyard was flooded with people in black. It was brilliant. It was kind of fun.
That's amazing. Almost every studio in London seemed to either be owned by a label or have a label in the building or have some affiliation.
Yeah, it was. And there's Some Bizarre was run by this guy, Steve-O, who's insane. So the stuff that used to be going on was sometimes reception resembled the Star Wars bar, you know, the planet. Well, never dull.
That's amazing. So how long were you there as an assistant before you started engineering? Because you seem to have gone pretty quickly.
It was very bizarre. I freelance engineered my first album after 7 months.
Right.
And I turned up day one and I didn't know anything. I was lucky. I worked with this band. They were called Antenna. They were a French band, and the producer was a guy called Martin Hales, who was an engineer and a producer. And so I was his assistant. And then when he went to do the album, he wanted somebody because I knew SSLs very well, so he wanted me to engineer for him. Basically, I think glorified assistant, really. Which was brilliant for me, because if I came into any trouble, he could just step in and fix it. So I started off doing this French jazz record, which was great because there's lots of musicians who all played. And I just learnt my craft a lot. But he taught me a hell of a lot.
Right.
Certainly about timing, tuning, and all those things. He was a big influence on me, Martin Hales.
Right. So assessing performances.
And then that's where I met Spike. Yeah, and that's where I met Spike, because we went to a studio called Jacobs, which was down in Surrey, and Mark was the house engineer there, and he was 18 years old.
Right.
And and we used to hang out after. He was doing Steel Pulse, a hardcore reggae band, and I was doing this French jazz band. And then when the sessions finished at about 2:00 in the morning, we used to hang out in the kitchen and discuss what frequencies we liked. You do when
Did you really?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Wow. So not bands or girls, just frequencies.
It was all nerd stuff.
Yeah. I know. Look, I still am the same way. Actually, I'd like to pretend that I'm not, but
yeah, it's a job requirement, I think.
So there's also something interesting that, and I could be completely wrong about this, but it seems as though you and Flood started doing the kind of anti-80s rock bands before they actually got big, like pre-Nirvana. So before the scene actually shifted, you were already doing records with these bands.
We were so lucky. Nobody, because it was the 80s, no trained engineer or guy from the posh studio, Jesus America, they wanted to do Trevor Horn stuff that made them look great. Because Psycho Candy is a brilliant sounding record, but in those days, to most of these engineers, it certainly wouldn't showcase their abilities,
right,
for sonic. So it seemed like Flood and I were the only two people in London who had been trained from the bigger studios that wanted to do those bands. And the bands were interested in us because they thought we did proper bands who got on the radio. So they thought, oh, they're technically really good, so we'll have them. So when Nirvana hit, we'd got a head start.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Suddenly after the big night, we're on board with the alternative, as it's called now. It was indie then.
Right. Well, I did want to ask you about one ridiculously audiophile record, which I think you assisted on, though, which is Jean-Michel Jarre Zuluk record.
Yeah. That was an interesting one because I didn't think I liked Jean-Michel Jarre at the time because, like I said, I was into Echo and the Bunnymen. And I'd done a session. In those days, you do lots of sessions that you'd been up all night and you'd have to do the next day. So the first day on Jean-Michel Jarre, I'd been up all night. And one session finished, I tidied up the studio and they came in. I thought, oh God, I'm doing Jean-Michel Jarre. And I heard the stuff and I thought, oh, this is pretty cool, actually. And he was hilarious. And his brain is remarkable. I remember him telling me that in those days you had code, everything went off codes, and there wasn't the SRC that everything drove off then. You'd have to print a code for every computer, like the Lindrum, the sequencer, I can't remember which sequencer it was, he used the Fairlight, and the SIMT or EBU for the computer, for the SSL. So I said, oh God, you have to record so many tracks. He said, oh, I've worked out a way. And he used to put each code through a spectrum analyzer, work out the frequencies that were specific to each code, and then he'd bounce them together. And then when he wanted to use a code, he'd filter out all the other ones.
You're joking.
And at that moment, I was in love. This in Jean-Michel Jarre to me.
And it worked.
It worked. I was a complete convert. I mean, also, the album was a great album.
It is. And it's very much in that kind of Trevor Horn land of just pristine work, but layer upon layer upon layer.
The only bad thing from my point of view was they were on an SSL. He'd recorded it on his MCI in Paris, and he realized that the SSL changed the sound too much. So after about 3 weeks, he went back to Paris and did it on his desk, so I wasn't actually involved in any of the stuff that was released.
All right. Well, that's
I got to hang out with him, which was great.
Yeah, and learn about filtering codes.
And I got my name on the record.
Yes, well, yes, you do, which is how I found it. But that's a record that I bought.
You're glitching
That
out.
was like a really early CD that I bought. You know, one of my first, along with some Trevor Horn stuff when CDs were like, oh my God, listen to what you can hear on that. You know, definitely. So, all right, let's get
Yeah,
you.
it was a great set.
Is there anything else that you did while you were at Trident as an assistant, really, that stuck out? Or because, like I say, you did start engineering pretty quickly.
I did, but I delayed the transition as much as possible. Trident had a way of they'd throw you in in the deep end, and you either sank or swam, and if you sank, you were fired. So I hung on. If there was a great gig, I wanted to assist on it. So I hung on being an assistant while I was engineering a lot. But I got to assist on a track with Tears for Fears, which I love. Song from the Big Chair album. There was a track called Mother's Talk, and they were looking for an engineer. And Dryden said to me, "Do you want to engineer it, Alan?" I'd got 4 months experience at that time. So I said, "You've got to be kidding. You know, I like this band. I don't want to ruin them." And so a guy called Dave Bascom got the job, and he didn't know SSLs very well. So I was his conduit to SSLs, and we were 48 tracks. So he wasn't used to that either. So we got on very well. So again, it was all the tech that they were doing, all the drum machines they were linking up. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, it seems to be a really common thing, especially in London, where assistants are getting gigs because they knew the SSL.
That was
Because
it. Yeah.
SSL was really good at getting their desks in places, and nobody knew how to run them.
First thing I did, because I hadn't, when I joined the second time, also, I found out on my first day that there were 3 runners or T-boys, one of them with 6 months experience. So I wasn't totally popular with them.
No, I'm surprised they didn't jump you.
Well, fortunately, I was taller than them. But fortunately, 2 of them got fired very quickly. And the other one with the 6 months experience, a guy called Al Clay, who actually went on to do really well, got promoted. So I got shunted out room, which was an SSL. It was the only SSL they had. So I just learned it as quickly as possible inside out. That was my whole goal, was to know that board inside out. So it got me a lot of work. It was good because people would want to come back because I'd help them through it.
Right. And it's if you help make the engineer look good, then that they love you, you know.
I also had a Breville sandwich toaster. So I used to feed them with toasted sandwiches as well.
Wow.
Get them toasted sandwiches or date paint. Just feed them and look after the SSL, and they like you, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can go a long way with a sandwich and an SSL.
That's right. There you go, yeah. But if I didn't like them and they're nasty to me, I make a toasted sandwich, like a cheese toasted sandwich with cold tomato in it.
Oh yeah.
And then they'd bite into it, and the cold tomato would be hot and it'd burn their lips.
Yeah.
So I'd subtly come back with the toasted sandwich.
Right, and they couldn't get mad, really, you know.
No, they couldn't, because I'd made it. Used to call it the Napalm Sandwich.
My wife used to get her dad with those, thinking it was cheese on toast, but she'd hidden a couple of tomatoes in there, thinking she was doing something nice. But yeah,
I worked it out the hard way, but there was a couple of people that got the dreaded Napalm Sandwich.
yeah, tomatoes are a lethal fruit, as it turns out.
Exactly.
Very much so. All right, enough about tomatoes. Sorry. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, because you just knew a ton of people as well. Like you knew Alan McGee from Creation Records before going there. You knew Dave Stewart through your girlfriend, then wife. Like there were lots of people that you knew at the same time, right?
Yeah, I was very lucky. When I was in Lincolnshire in these no mark bands. A couple of guys I went to school with were in London, and they were in this band, Laughing Apple, which was Alan McGee's band. So there was a gig that I put on at my band put on in Boston, and we got Laughing Apple to support us. And McGee was working for British Rail then. So he came down on the free train ride, which is the perk of British Rail, played the gig, and we got talking and became friends. And so when I came to London, I just said, "Oh, Alan, but we're in London," and I started going to his club nights, the living room, when I had time off, and we just kind of became friends. And he set up Creation with a guy called Dick Green, who I went to school with, weirdly enough.
Wow.
And so I got, when they came to Jesus Mary Chain, came to Trident, it was kind of like McGee was still managing them then. So I then got asked to do live sound for the Mary Chain, which was fun. I mean, I'd never done live sound before. And did the first shows at the Hacienda in Manchester, which was cool, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Second show was in Hammersmith, and I blew the rig on the last number, took out 8 mid-range.
Which they probably liked, right?
Well, fortunately, it was the last song because there was no fixing it. They got presented with a large bill but everybody, it was good, quite effective, because everybody, including myself, thought they'd blown their eardrums, because it was like all top just went. And I did one more with them, and I thought, this isn't for me, really. I'm not really very good at it. Right. Leave it to a professional. But it was fun.
And it cements the relationship too, which is a big deal.
That's right. Then they came back to me to work on Automatic, their next album. So I got to engineer that, which was the thing that probably changed my career, really.
Right.
Doing that record. It made them doing, because I was doing at that time I was actually doing a lot of dance music at Trident. We were doing a lot of, there's the start of remixes where you almost wipe the board clean apart from the lead vocal and pull the music around it. And I thought, this is punk rock. This is kind of really, it got me into a genre of music that I wasn't particularly into, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it looked like I was going to be a dance mixer.
Right.
And then the Mary Chain came along, put me on my path, which was great.
And
Dave Stewart, yes, he was... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Dave Stewart, yeah, my wife knew him from Sunderland, where she came from. And she was in a band. She had a solo career, and Dave signed her to his Anxious record label, which he just set up. I got to meet him, and then he formed a management company because he got so much work offered to him that he couldn't do it all. And Trident was just splitting up at the time, so he took me on as on his books as one of his engineers, and that's where I met my manager. She ran it, Karen Ciccone, and that was it. And then Tony went on, stayed on the label for a while, formed her band Curve, and yeah, that was it with Dave. And that's where I also met his wife at the time, was Siobhan Fahey, who used to be in Bananarama. And then she just formed this new band, Shakespeare's Sister. So I did some work with them, and we got on really well, and I got to produce her second album.
Yeah, which was huge.
Co-produced.
Huge record, right?
Well, there's a song called Stay on it that was #1 in England for, I think, about 8 weeks. And Siobhan and I didn't want that song on the record.
Shows what you know.
Don't ask me to pick a thing. Exactly. Don't ask me to pick it. And I didn't like it at the time, but I like it now.
That seems to be a recurring theme. Greg Penny told an amazing story a couple months ago about a Katie Lang record where the song that was just absolutely gigantic, she literally snuck out of the studio to stop from having to sing it because she hated it so much. And then Constant Craving, gigantic hit, all of
exactly
that. But it's a thing, and it's the whole thing about pop when you're not necessarily a pop artist, but you
I
have a
think
pop hit.
Siobhan, I think, was trying not to be pop to get away from Bananarama, and I think she knew that this one was pop, and there you go.
But it worked out. But so now your first production gig was one of your wife's solo records, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And
That was the
did you I've read so many things in the last few days. I'm probably getting this wrong, but did you have Flood mix that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that was the one. So how'd that go?
It was good. It was first time we had an argument. And it was good. It was
But I just think it would be a really interesting dynamic to be going from a working relationship where you had always been his assistant to now you are the producer. Because he's doing the same job, but all of a sudden, you know.
It was. I mean, to be honest, I think I just found the whole thing of being a producer on that record odd. I think it was a big jump for me in terms of what I'd done before, and I didn't totally probably 100% feel comfortable in that role. But what are you going to do? You just get on and do it, don't you? So you're kind of just learning your trade as you go on, you know.
Right.
And throw into the fact that it's your wife who's the artist. So in the car on the way home, a few lively rides back home in that one.
So it's your first fight with her as well.
It wouldn't have been the first one, but
No.
there was plenty more. Added something else to argue about rather than me not being at home.
Wow. Yeah. She knew exactly where you were, so that's something.
Yeah, exactly.
God, that's funny. So you and Flood have had. I keep wanting to go chronologically, but it's kind of ridiculous. We were talking about this before we started because you've had these unbelievable long-term relationships with bands and with Flood especially. So, have we lost you? Are you there?
You're back now.
Okay.
Have you lost me or?
Rather than just going chronologically, I mean, I'll keep an eye on my list to make sure we talk about Swervedriver, because if we don't, there'll be, heads will roll. But, I mean, I'd love to know just sort of, you're one of the most collaborative producers and engineers I know of, because most people, because you engineer more than you produce, at least certainly lately, but you seem really happy to have somebody else co-producing with you. You're almost always co-producing with the bands. You bring in other engineers all the time. You'll have, in that case, had someone else mix. Obviously, that was early on. But is this something you actually look to do, that you really don't want to be trying to take the whole project on yourself? You like to have a foil?
You spotted it. Busted my insecurity, yeah. I just think I know what I'm good at and what I feel comfortable with. And like when I got Joe to agree to engineer Wolfmother with me, it was a dream because I feel I got backup, it's like, and I always do co-produce with bands because I feel any band that I want to work with is going to have an input. And I feel I take half the credit and half the blame. So
right.
Damage limitation really. So I like working with other people. I just feel it makes me feel more confident.
Right.
I think that's the case. And I always think of myself as an engineer first, really.
And so when you're working with another engineer, I mean, obviously Joe's probably a special case as well, being Joe Barresi, but do you ever feel like you want to reach over their shoulder because it's not what you want to hear? Or do you find yourself acclimating to the way they engineer in a way that's fine for you?
Well, it varies. I mean, if I'm using an engineer who's been my assistant, and then we go and do some recording, and then I will probably occasionally lean over and get involved because it probably may be a very early job for them, because it strikes me as, like I said, the Martin Hales thing that I had with the first album I did, that it's much easier. You just show them how you want it. But normally you can just get it by talking to people or telling them what you want. But sometimes I'll jump on. I'll ask first.
Right.
But sometimes.
Yeah, it's almost
But
like
yeah, having Joe was deluxe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my dream, is to have Joe engineer everything I ever do. I just want to show up and hang out with him, basically. But
Me too. It was great. It was, yeah. It was. I was so happy that he agreed to do it.
do you have a list of people that you would like to work with, and then you try and find a project, or is it just each project sort of happens as it happens?
Each one kind of happens as it happens. Yeah, yeah, that's it. There's no, I don't think I'm that far ahead really.
Right.
Or I don't deem that lucky enough to get them, you know.
Right.
I'd love to have got Andy Wisnick, something I'd done, but I didn't.
Well, we can just listen to all the stuff he's already done. That's,
No.
you know, and then feel really bad about our own work, but really happy that that exists. So
That was my life for a long period of time. Fortunately, he's not doing as much now. He's slowed down a bit.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'm still terrified by the first like 10 records he ever mixed. I haven't gone past that, you know. First Rage record, I'm stuck there. I can't, you know.
That was on my list, you know.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
I still AV to that.
Yeah.
You know.
All right. It's how to structure these things. It's just like the progression of bands that happened in a very short period of time is kind of astounding. I mean, so you've got, well, here's a really weird one actually. Before we go back, you've got a very early credit on Ziggy Stardust. Why is that? Is that on a, what's going on there? Do you have any idea?
It can only be that I did a mix of Moon Age Daydream for an advert.
Okay.
Apart from that, I wasn't involved.
All right. Well, fair enough. Fair enough. But so going to the things that we know,
that was good, getting an act of that. Moon Age Daydream.
That's just,
it may have been on a reissue or something.
Right. But great to just put up the tracks and things.
I wasn't even aware I got that, but that's nice.
Yeah, well, according to the internet, yeah, you know, who knows? The internet is a dangerous place to get information from these days. But so you've got this sort of run up to My Bloody Valentine and Ride and the Levelers, and like all of that seemed to sort of happen at once. And
yeah. I don't know where the Levelers one came from. I didn't work with them. But
no? Okay. Well,
I have seen that on the internet as well.
So that's on the internet. So forget about the Levelers. I thought it was weird. I just kept them in there.
The only Levelers I've got are in my rack.
Okay. All right. So other than the Levelers, though, so how, obviously My Bloody Valentine was, I mean, that record is seminal to a lot of people. Yeah. And I'd love to hear sort of where you were at going into that and your role and just, I don't know. It's one of those records where I don't normally ask this because it's such a weird question, but like, how did that record seem as you were making it? Was it just very much of the time and another thing, or did it seem like something different?
Well, I'd worked with the Mary Chain. And had I worked with Ride? Yeah, I'd done a bit of stuff with Ride. So McGee again came and thought that I was his hi-fi engineer who knew what he was doing. So he put me up for the Valentines and said, "It'll only take 3 weeks, Alan." There was another year. And so I went in. The first thing I did with them was a track called Soon, which was a mix. It was already done. I'd heard that Kevin was quite particular about things, so I was quite delicate with him on what he wanted me to do. And Kevin's very hands-on, so I'll be honest, I've got a lot more credit from working on that album than I really deserve, because he does everything. But my role became, I think, keeping him sane, because he kept thinking things were wrong in the studio, and quite often they were, because we were in a lot of budget studios. And if you used the house engineer often owned the studio. So they'd try and pull the wool over his eyes a bit, maybe.
Right.
He'd lose confidence and there'd be a downward spiral. So I was the guy that he'd say, I think something might not be right. And he'd leave the room and I would investigate and he'd go, you're right, it's fixed now, or I'd say, no, it's okay. So that was kind of my role. But the music, we started off doing bass, I think. And that was different because we used the Steinberger bass. Remember the one with no hair?
Yeah.
Because it was very even. Actually, Papa doesn't want me to tell anybody about that, but we did. And we cleared our strings because he'd changed the strings so often that there weren't any left. Just doing the basses on that album. And then we went on to guitars, which was the kind of basic rhythm guitars had kind of been done. And so we were doing the overdub bits. And you did know it was different because you'd spend the day getting the sound, kind of. You'd try things like having 2 amps facing each other so that he could get them to modulate so that all the sound would meld together differently. And you'd spend ages setting it all up. Then he'd change the strings on his guitar again, and then he'd redo the intonation. And there'd be all this preparation, and he'd say, okay, just put the machine in cycle and give me a bit of time to practice. And I'd go out and sit and watch television for about an hour or so. And then he'd just come in and go, okay, we're ready. And we'd record 3 times, three takes, no drop-ins, done.
Wow.
Use the third one or the second one, done. So it was kind of the opposite way around to everything, that the actual recording process it's almost like an anticlimax. It's like, what this done?
Yeah.
You know? And then so we just went, every day would be like an overdub. So it was brilliant fun. And then I remember there was one day we did, and then we'd do some mixing. And we did do a mix of one track that was basically feedback. And it's like a 12-minute track of feedback, which that affects you after 12 hours.
Yeah.
You kind of go home slightly loopy. But Kevin, he's a remarkable person to work with. His hearing is phenomenal. His brain is phenomenal. And I was very lucky to be involved in that record. It was a very inspiring record.
And would you end up having to redo things, or like once you did those 3 tracks, you used take 2 and that was it, and it was kept?
Yeah, nothing got redone.
So it's just the prep was insane.
Yeah. And I don't think once we did a mix, we never remixed either. It was once Kevin was happy,
right?
It would take you a fuck of a long time to get to the fact he was happy. But once he was happy, he was happy.
Which is amazing because it really proves that the vision was there and you're just realizing it.
I couldn't believe there were no guide vocals. When I was working on the album, there's no guide vocals. And I said, do you know, Phil, you want to put a guide vocal on? I said, no, it's in my head. I know what it is. And I had to leave. I had to go and do another album because I was told 3 weeks. I then had to go and do Shakespeare's Sister, I think. Actually, I went and did Shakespeare's Sister and came back and was still working on it. But something else came up and he mixed it on his own. And when I heard the vocals, because I hadn't heard any of the vocals, I'd only heard some backing vocals. Normally when you get so attached to a backing track that's as interesting as that, you can often hear the vocal and be disappointed.
Yeah.
Not one of those songs was I disappointed. They all were like, it was like it was always there. It's quite strange.
Right. I think when the artist has that finished product in their head, it really is all built for the vocal. Whereas if you don't, you're building for what you're hearing. And it's a different thing. So did you enjoy the setting up amps for an incredibly long time? Because I know, like, now you will experiment, you will take time, you'll try everything, you'll make sure that, like, every stone has been turned. Did that kind of come from these sessions, or were you just always like that?
I think I ended up working with people that were like that, and it kind of, that's how you think things are done, you know. So
Right.
everybody I kind of worked with seemed to be, certainly for a period of years, was half studio, half science lab, you know.
Right. Well, yeah, we haven't gotten to Nine Inch Nails yet, but we're not that far off. I mean, that's...
I loved it. I mean, I was a guitar player, so all the pedals, all the different guitars, the different amps. I was in heaven, you know.
Right.
Loud rock all day, very quiet vocals, fantastic.
Yeah. And another reason you got along so well with Barisi.
Exactly, guitar whores. But yeah, it was. I just learned with Kevin I learned quite quickly how far to put myself, and basically to be there almost as his assistant, really. I was the engineer, but I was really kind of the assistant.
Right.
And he was under so much pressure from the label that if I'd put pressure on him, he'd have fired me. I remember Alan McGee woke me up one morning at 9 o'clock, and I think I got in at 8. And he was in tears, saying, you know, Alan, it's going to take the label down. We can't afford it. You got to hurry him up. I said, I can't. If I try to hurry him up, he'll fire me. So all I can do is make it go as smoothly as I can, and let him do what he wants. Because if anyone crosses him at this stage, he'll just move on to the next, because he can't deal with it.
Right. Right. I mean, but at least you could tell Alan that he's moving forward all the time, just really slowly. It's not like, well, we have no idea where we're at. You know exactly where you were at.
Yeah, we just had to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it must have seemed, sorry, I was just going to say, it must have made every other record seem quite quick right after that.
Yes. I mean, it's funny because I was doing that at the same time Flood was doing pop. Not pop, he was doing...
Was it Octane Baby?
Acton Baby, yeah.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't Acton Baby. It was the one after that. The one with, what was it called? The kind of really experimental album they did. The one after Acton Baby.
I thought pop was after Acton Baby.
It got a track called Lemon on it, and it's a pretty experimental album.
That's not pop. It's Zooropa. There you go. My fact checker Mark has texted me. Thank you very much, Mark.
He was doing that while I was doing Loveless, and U2 at the time were flying around. They were doing gigs in Portugal, getting on the plane and coming back to the studio. So he had a lot of time sitting around, and I had a lot of time sitting around. So we used to phone each other up all the time, going, "Have you pressed record yet today?" "No, not yet." Having these conversations, keeping each other saying, "So what's the record?" "It's fucking good," you know. So, but I had a support system.
Right. Yeah, you've always had this crew, which is just great.
Yeah, it keeps you sane.
Yeah, and to be able to make records with them too. So we should talk about Ride a little bit, because those are some fantastic records too. Did you work on their first one, or did you come in on the second?
I mixed the first one.
Mixed the first, right?
Yeah, I got to mix that, and we got on really well. And then I produced the second one, Going Blank Again. And that's right. And then I've worked on the last 2 albums as well.
Right. So you missed the Draculius one in the middle of that, right?
They went, I think, that when they kind of wanted to go more American sound, and they moved on, which is fair enough.
Right. And then, but you've mixed the 2 that they've put out recently.
Yes.
Yeah, which were actually done in a studio very close to here at Vale Studios.
That's right. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
half an hour
With,
away. And the Chris and Moira who run that are amazing. They're
I heard Errol, who produced it, who's actually upstairs now with Duran Duran, had sung its praises massively. He was a lovely guy to work, an amazing producer.
yeah. And Moira makes good cakes, so you might want to book a session there.
Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, I mean, a really long ride with Ride. That's terrible. I can't do that. But I mean, it's a lot of records, and you definitely seem to forge relationships with these bands where you don't mind if they go away and come back, you know, because everybody's got other stuff they do in the middle, but they do seem to come back too.
Yeah, they do. I have had a few come back. It's true. I mean, I always take the attitude that I never expect to do the next record. I it's every band has to move on and progress, and sometimes I think if they don't move on, I kind of would probably respect them less, you know, because it's their career. I go on to my next record, but it's it's their career. So they have the choice, and I never take it personally.
Right. But you've had long tendencies with a lot, but I think we got to go to Swervedriver now, because if we don't, I'll lose my mind because we have to talk about it. So this was, again, you didn't actually work on their first record?
No,
at
unfortunately
all?
not. No.
Right.
That was Lee Dutt,
Yeah.
who actually used to work in this room. This was when she worked for Battery, and this was the room she used to work in a lot.
All right. But you came in on Mezcal Head, and
I did one track EP before,
right,
which was Never Lose That Feeling, and then I came in on Mezcal Head. Yeah.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the records, and just for the people who haven't had time to read the entire internet about Swervedriver, I think you need to tell their sad story. Because like their third record, Ejector Seat Reservation, which is one of my favorite records of all time, never even came out in the Western Hemisphere, did it? I mean, it did now, but
they had some bad luck, definitely. Every time they signed to a label, the key person left, especially with their American labels. And on Ejector Seat, I think Alan McGee just didn't like it. He rang me up and said, I don't get it, which I was amazed. But I worked on the first track I did with them, Never Lose That Feeling. They had a different drummer. And this is a classic. I remember doing the session. They're about to go on tour the next day of America, I think. And the drummer was constantly under the desk on the phone to some girlfriend in hushed tones, and knew what was going on that phone call, and it wasn't good. Somebody not impressed by the amount of time that he was spending with his girlfriend. So then they went off to tour America, and they got to the Canadian border, and the guards came on the bus and said, "Oh, you want to tell us about your drummer leaving?" And he basically got off the bus and said, "I'm not going." And the first thing they knew about it was at the border. They got a tour to do, and he just left.
Wow.
And they said, "What did this?" And Jimmy said, "What do you mean he's not coming?" He said, "No, he's in the office saying he's not coming. He's getting off here." So they had to find a replacement drummer. This classic Swervedriver luck kind of thing. So they managed to get through that. Then when we did Mezcal Head, the bass player had left. He went to form his own band. So there's really just Jimmy and Adam, and they got a different bass player, Steve, and the drummer, who was a very different drummer, Jez, who was a very different drummer to the first one, who was a much more meat and potatoes. Jez was a lot more Keith Moon, and he was very into studio stuff as well. He was a bit of an engineer himself. So they didn't have a bass player. That's right. So Adam played the basses, I think, which wasn't ideal because different technique. I tried to get them to use the Steinberger bass, the Valentines are used, but there's no way they're using it. I said, no, it's got no head. Nobody will know it's that bass. I don't care, I'm not using it. So I had to go through using some basses that weren't quite as good, but we made an interesting record. I mean, working with those guys when they're playing guitar is phenomenal. Just one, they're great players, but two, if you watch Adam while he's playing and he's changing his pedals, it's like watching a dance sequence. It's remarkable. I just kind of ended up, I wasn't listening, I was just glued to watching his feet. But yeah, we had fun making the records. They were never on time. I remember you'd be waiting 4 hours for them to turn up, and you'd always go. You wouldn't really get started before 10 o'clock at night or something. You just go through the night, but it was what it's all about. It's fun.
Yeah, fantastic records. I mean, Adams, I feel like he's like the hard rock Andy Partridge in a way. Like his ability to write songs and melodies and chord structures is just incredible.
Yeah. Incredible. And the way him and Jimmy fit together it's quite special. They definitely hold a massive place in my heart. I've got a picture in the studio.
Oh, excellent.
They've made the wall of the studio, which that sums them up. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
All the pedals with the song names on.
Nice.
So they're constant. They're constantly with me.
As they should be. As they should be. Definitely.
I didn't do Rave Down though, and that's the thing that's my favorite one.
Now, is your favorite just because you didn't do it? Or
I think it's still my favorite. Yeah, I do love that one. But I love that.
And the new records are great too.
They are great. We're still in touch, and my old assistant John Catlin mixes their records now.
Right.
So we keep it in the family.
Nice. Well, yeah, we'll talk about your whole family in a minute, because the sort of the group that started off at Trident obviously was an amazing group, but you've got your own group now, which is pretty great. But we got a couple of decades to get through. So I'll just stick to the bands you've done tons of records with, or many records with. So we can go to Smashing Pumpkins now, because this is in the same time frame. So I'll just say Smashing Pumpkins. You say.
Thank you very much. That was a great thing to land in your lap. I knew them. I saw their first gig in London because their manager, Raymond Coffer, managed my wife's band, Curve. So he told us to come along, and I remember saying to him, yeah, they're good, really good band. They've got to get a new name, though. It's going to hold them back. Which obviously was wrong. And they were fans of the Valentines and the Mary Chain, probably mainly the Valentines. And Butch Vig, who'd recorded their album, didn't think that Andy Wallace would have the patience to mix this one, to mix Siamese Dream, because he knew that there were 3-day mixes in there, which
right.
I was kind of used to anyway, so probably not as in depth as with those. So I got the job because Butch liked Honey's Dead, a Mary Chain album I did, and Billy was a big Valentine's fan, and they figured that if I could work with Kevin, who they thought took a long time, I'd have the patience to give what they needed. So I got that job, which was great, and mixing that album was... I remember turning up and hearing Butch Vig play his mixes and from records he worked on, and thinking, I need to up my game here. I listened to mine afterwards and thought, yep, I need to up my game here. So it was definitely a learning curve of the American sound and the bottom end of those rock drums and things. And the drums, just generally the different attitude to it, that was a lot more fidelity based. And I learned loads from it, from the pair of them. Billy's remarkable in the studio. I mean, he's all over the stuff. guitar effects, H3000s. He was great on those, and he would just it was like a great three-piece team that would just keep pushing forward, but Billy would keep pushing it forward and forward and forward. And of course, it was on tape then, and some of those you'd have 3 different drum kits, so you'd have to do it all on the cross mutes. It was pretty involved and quite. I think I got my first grey hair mixing Soma, which took 5 days. I remember going in the bathroom we're at a studio called Rumbo in the Valley. I remember all going to the bathroom and looking, what's that? It's a great hair. Less than many.
So when you said you had to up your game, I mean, did you really decide that you would mix it in the American rock style, or like that was going to happen no matter what you did anyway? Or did you ever think that they wanted you in there to do your thing?
It was very collaborative. I think they wanted an engineer with patience who understood the music and was as into it as they were. And I fitted that bill. I guess I got my indie credentials over here from the bands I'd worked with. And yeah, I kind of just remember thinking, this is, I better do a damn good job here. Because there was a massive buzz about them at the time as well, that the album was going to be big before it kind of was done. So it was quite unique.
Right. Well, and Butch was King Midas around then too.
Exactly. He was on fire, If we went out for the night, there's Butch Vig and Billy Corgan and some tall English guy.
But again, now you were still taller than both of them, right? Because Billy's kind of tall.
Billy's tall. I've got it.
All right, good.
Don't quite have Jim on me, but I got Billy Corgan.
As long as you always have that. It's all good. But then you worked with them on more records than that.
Yes, we did. Then we did Melancholy, which I think Billy knew I was still talking to Flood a lot. I think he was still doing Zeropa when I started doing this. And so he knew we were friends, and it was Zeropa that made Billy want to work with Flood.
Right.
Because of how experimental it was. So I'd been touted to be involved in it. And then Flood's name came into the picture, and we just decided, both of us, to do it. And we started off in their rehearsal space in Chicago, which sounded really good. And Flood would go out on his own for a bit, and then I'd be there on my own for a bit. And then we moved it all to CRC in Chicago, a commercial studio, and we set up there and continued. And we had 2 rooms. There used to be a main tracking room and a room where Billy would be working in, and then quite often I'd be working with Darcy and James, because Billy used to play the basses on all the records, because time generally, just because they had to move it knew it'd be a lot quicker. And on this record, Flood wanted more Darcy and more James, so it worked out great, because Billy, as long as Billy was working, he was fine, because he'd get bored and get twitchy and want to be,
Right.
So as long as he was working, he'd come into our room, and he'd see that Darcy would play the bass, and it would be different to how he'd play it, and he'd see that, and he enjoyed it. So they got to have both Darcy and James got to have a lot more input. I think James played most of the solos on the album.
Right. And how did the roles split up just organically, or did you have to sit down and kind of figure it out? Because, I mean, the fact that you were both out there individually, there's no worry about contradictory things going on, or...
Flood and I think we work so well is we pretty well see eye to eye, apart from when we really don't. But generally on the big picture, we will see eye to eye or debate it in a way. So when we were in different, we'd talk. So there was part of it was kind of demoing, and at that time. So it wasn't too stressful anyway. It's just more like getting everyone match fit, ready to go.
Right.
ERC, although we actually ended up capturing a lot of drum tracks from the rehearsal room.
Right. I mean, it just because it's hard for younger folk to remember this. You couldn't just send them an MP3 and say, "Hey, this is where these songs are at."
No, you'd have to
You'd post a CD, maybe.
or DAT. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
yeah.
So
So yeah, you couldn't really. All we could do, we'd just talk about it, and then we do work. Flood and I work very well together.
right. And is each record different in terms of how things split up, even if you're working with the same band, or
Um, it tends to evolve. It has definitely evolved. I mean, Melancholy was again at the beginning of my production career, and so Flood definitely ran that show brilliantly. I was tucked in behind his coattails a little bit. He carried me a bit on that one. Thank you very much. But then it always tended to be that I'd mix mainly. But how we used to do it anyway was I'd do the mix, and then it'd come to a point, and then I'd move over and he'd carry on. And he'd change the shape a little bit, and then I kind of go, oh, I see what you're going for. And then I'd take over and do my finagling. We'd back and forth quite a lot on it.
which is great. I mean, this is again back to your co-producing with bands too. It takes a lot of pressure off to know somebody else is going to sit down at some point.
As long as you know that guy's got your back, and he's not snipering to take you and get you out of the way, it's great. As long as you have that comfortable feeling, we're all on the same team and we all want the same end result, then it's really good. It's a lot less stress, or it's stress halved. We used to find we'd meet up after the session to have a drink or something and debrief to see where we're both at, check that each of us was still okay.
Right. And it's rare to find people who aren't sniping for your job though too, because it's a super competitive industry.
I know. I've been very lucky, really, or I've subtly, without knowing it, surrounded myself by people who I know have got my back.
Yeah, well, you definitely have. It's pretty amazing. All right, should we? I mean, we're moving along here, but should we get to Nine Inch Nails? Because that's kind of the next big, gigantic thing. Now we're skipping over some stuff though, because we're skipping over a little Monster Magnet in here and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's completely up to you if there's stuff, because there's the Moby record. There's the really weird Metallica thing. Like,
the remix.
Yeah. We should talk about those two, actually, because they're sort of outliers.
We'll do Monster Magnet first. I got approached by Dave or the record label to work on their album. Loved it. It'd been recorded at Magic Shop by Steve Rosendahl, who had produced it, I think. But I wanted to mix it on a board that had fixed frequencies. So we mixed it on a VR at Sound. What's it called? Where Andy Wallace used to work in New York. Sound.
Not Sound Techniques. That's the one that Brower came out of.
It was
that one called Sound something.
Yeah, I wish. And interestingly enough, I then bought the book. I bought the board that we mixed it on for our room upstairs.
Oh, is that the one upstairs? Right.
It was. It's now gone. They've now got a Cadillac up there. The one that the Sex Pistols recorded "Nevermind the Bollocks" on. So
really,
an even older one. Yeah.
Wow. Does it smell interesting or anything?
It looks very clean. We got it from Radiohead, and they cleaned it up.
Oh, nice. Good.
So I got to do that record. And again, I just loved it. It was, especially the song "Teenage Negasonic Water." As soon as I heard that, I thought, I'm in. I'm doing this record. As soon as I heard that, and I just loved it. And I worked with Dave on a couple of tracks on the next album too, but I haven't worked with him since. So that was a great time. Then Moby, that was again interesting. So he was on mute. So I got a call from Daniel Miller, and he said, "Are you interested in working with Moby?"
Oh, frozen.
Picked up. I thought this is going to be great. I'll learn loads of stuff. Hello.
Oh, yep.
Am I back?
You're back. You're back. So you got a call. Are you
We're
interested
here?
in working with Moby?
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
where we
back.
left off.
So I thought, you got me?
Yeah.
Caesar's downloading porn again.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. We got you.
Okay. So I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to learn loads about technology and synths and tech. And he said, and Daniel said, well, this is a guitar record. Moby's doing a guitar record, and he doesn't really know much about recording guitars. I thought maybe you'd be a good guy too. I said, okay. So went over to his studio, which was it in Soho or the Village kind of thing. He got this room that was really bare kind of room, and he'd built a little control room inside it, but it was all really rough, and all his tape machines, it was 3 ADATs linked up together. And he'd only really used DI guitars, all he'd done before. So we got some amps, and we had to build a sound insulating box because of the neighbors. And so he was using all this stuff, and he got his computer, and I said, what about SMPTE? Or he said, oh, I don't use SMPTE. I said, are you kidding me? I said, how do you sync things up? He says, I don't. He said, I do the drums on my computer, and then I record it free. And if I want to do any fills, then I just play them along. I said, really? He said, yeah, it's fine. So anyway, he went home one night, and I got SMPTE working on his thing. It was Studio 4 or something. He hadn't got it working. I said, we got SMPTE now. We're locked up. So yeah, fine. So I just lock it anyway. So a couple of days later, he goes, so if I wanted to play these fills and then take out the doubles, I can do it. I said, yeah. So we do that. And then after another day, SMPTE's magic.
And I love that you went in because you were the guitar guy and he was the tech guy.
Yeah, that's right. But I still did learn a lot from him. He was a very interesting guy to work with. His techniques were quite unusual. And what we did which was great, we'd record a song a day. And if he didn't like it, we'd just do it again. We wouldn't try and patch it up. We'd just start again.
Right.
So it was like punk rock. So that was Moby. That was interesting.
All right. So Metallica.
While I was doing that record, Moby was asked to do this remix. He said, are you interested in doing it with me? I said, of course I am. It's Metallica. Of course I'm interested in doing it with you. So he's got balls, that guy, because he did one version of it that was lounge, like a lounge version. And of course, with Hetfield's vocals, it sounded really weird, really kind of odd, because it was like a bossa nova beat and like a pad keyboard thing, and it did sound like a lounge band. And he said, I'm going to call this the motherfucking ass fucker mix or something. He said, I'm putting it first on the DAT. And then he did the proper one. Put that one first on the DAT, which Metallica, you got balls doing that.
That's funny because people talk about doing stuff like that all the time.
Yeah, but he did. I said, really? He said, yeah. It'll be funny, right? Yeah, it'll be funny. So that's where that happened. That was all him. I didn't really do much.
Well, you probably had to label the DAT or something.
Yeah, I did have to label the DAT. I got to write the fucking ass fucking me.
Well, thank God they actually skipped ahead to number 2.
Yes, that's what I thought. It was a rip.
All right. Well, so I suppose, and also just because every single person we talk to has worked with you too, You ended up working on the U2
Pop.
records as
Yeah.
well, right?
I worked on Pop for a bit. There was Flood came straight home from doing Melancholy and went straight into doing Pop, which I don't know how he managed to do, because the stress level on both must have been, well, it was massive and there's no break. So I went out for a period of time towards the end when Spike Stent was doing it, actually, and he had to go and do Madonna, I think. So I went over for a month, and it was crazy. It was great fun, but crazy. And we were recording vocals, and it was on a Neve board. They had this Neve board, and it was all on tape, of course, and nothing was structured on tape properly. So to hear the song, you had to manually mix it, because if you just didn't, things would come in that shouldn't come in, and the balances were all wrong. So you had to learn how to mix it and do the mutes, because you have to mute things out. And then Bono would be singing right like this in the front of the speakers on a handheld mic, with the speakers really loud. And yet, so you had to ride his vocals so it didn't feed back, and change the effects from the verse to the choruses and things like this. So he was singing, you were going like this, trying to keep everything all right, which wasn't too bad every time you went from the top, because you just reset. But when he said, okay, now go for the second verse, it was like, it was chaos. But it was exciting, and he can sing.
Yeah.
So it was definitely another one of, you have to up your game to keep up with those people.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to work with them in the era of digital, so at least I didn't have to do that part of it.
Blood likes putting you in situations where you're sweating it and out of your depth and struggling. He loves that. He just quietly sits there smiling while he sees you suffer.
But you still like him.
Yeah, I've got him back a few times.
All right, good.
And also, that's where you learn, isn't it? Where you're scared and you kind of think, oh God, I'm out of my depth there. I'm going to get fired. So it's good. It ups you. At the end of the day, if you got away with it, I haven't got fired, you feel good.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a common thread with a lot of people who've had, I mean, your career is immense. And at that point, your career had been immense already. And you still go in thinking, I could get fired. And like, that would be a terrible thing. Not like, I don't need this. It's like, you don't want to be the guy who gets fired off the U2 record.
Of course not. I think we've all got imposter syndrome that we're waiting to be found out.
There are a couple who don't, interestingly.
Really?
But yeah, most of us do, big time.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, there are some who are very quietly confident. Like John Leckie, it didn't seem as though like that. It just didn't occur to him. He's just always done what he does, sort of thing. So he doesn't not have it in an arrogant way at all. But
yeah,
whereas I'm always sure that I've already done my last gig,
Yeah, same as me. Yeah. So.
But yeah, most of us do. So, all right, I'd like to actually talk about just briefly, because I mean, I think it was just a mix gig, but the Remy Zero record you mixed.
Yeah.
Because that band is, especially in LA, just revered. Absolutely, like they were going to be the LA Radiohead before Radiohead hit.
And Radiohead put their name behind them. They said that they liked them, I think.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And that was around the time of the second record, wasn't it? I think.
Well, yeah. It was. That's when there was definitely a big hype about them at that time. Or buzz, probably more than the hype. And I got to mix it, which I really enjoyed. I was on a break from Nine Inch Nails, The Fragile, and mixed that. That was the only thing I think I did. Was it? While that record was being made. But yeah, it was. A couple of the band came over, and it had been recorded really well, and it was a joy to work on.
Right. Well, that was quick. That's easy. It's fine.
Yeah, I think it was Yeah, fun, good, great. I really enjoyed that record.
All right, well, now we're going to talk about Nine Inch Nails, which was not simple.
No, that was again. It started off as a flood. Flood produced. First thing I did with them was mix Downward Spiral.
Right.
I mean, it was a brilliant time for me because I just finished Siamese Dream, and Flood had been working on Downward Spiral, but he had to leave to go, and he had another commitment. He had to go and do a Night to Ebb record. So apparently I've been told I'd been, without Flood's input, I'd been on the list of people to mix. But I think Flood probably, because we got a history of the casting vote, that we knew it'd probably work easier. So yeah, I got thrown into, we started off, I worked on some Marilyn Manson tracks. I think it was a test.
Right.
For Trent to see if I was okay. So I went from doing Ride and all these kind of sweet English bands to Marilyn Manson.
His first record, right?
Yeah. And it was different. It was, a few people had turned it down because the lyrics and things and the whole thing really, but I just thought I liked it. So that was our first introduction to working together. We mixed 4 tracks that are being produced by somebody else, and then we recorded 6 tracks. And then Sean Bevan, who worked with Trent, mixed those while we moved on to Downward Spiral.
Right.
And it was in those days that we had 4 tracks of Pro Tools. It was the first time I'd seen Pro Tools. The 4 tracks, or sound
tools.
What's it called? Sound. Yeah. So that was my first seeing that, and again, I fell in love with Trent because of his tech ability. The first time I'd seen the Macs, it was all Atari 1040s in England. And so this was like, whoa, this is incredible. And he's bringing out these wave shaper plugins that, well, I go, whoa, I just can't believe you can do that. And so, yeah, we mixed that record in Power Plant, I think, in LA. And Prince was down the corridor. I remember that it was just when he'd become...
So Record Plant, I think, right?
Record Plant.
Yeah.
He had just become the symbol and not Prince.
Right.
And Trent was a massive fan of Prince. But we'd heard that everyone in the staff had been told they can't address him, they can't look him in the eye, they can't, all this very, prima donna-y stuff. And so Trent thought, bollocks. Right, next time he comes in, we're following him down the corridor because we're clients. What can they do? So every time he used to come in, he'd come in full Prince gear, looking amazing, with his minders. We'd all walk out the studio and walk down the corridor, staring at him, just to make him feel uncomfortable. Very childish. But,
and did you ever talk to him?
No.
No.
We're just scared, I think. But we did intimidate him, or try and intimidate him. He didn't look very intimidated, if I'm honest. I think we were probably intimidated. But yeah, that record was great. It was 4 tracks. There were 2. It was 48 track and walls of synthesizers and samplers that all ran live. Yeah, I didn't get to do Hurt, unfortunately, because he hadn't finished that one by the time I had to leave.
Right.
Which is a shame, but there you go.
Well, you did the rest.
And then, yes, exactly. And then what happened? Then he did some other stuff with Dave Ogilvy, who he also worked with. And then I think I went out and mixed Perfect Drug. And that's when he asked me to do The Fragile. And that was 2 years in New Orleans.
Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit if you don't mind, because you could probably just say, "Oh, it was fine," but
it was brilliant. It was the most fun I've had doing an album. This so good. I bought the desk. This is the desk I did it on, and I've kind of formed an attachment from sitting at it for 2 years. So I turned up, okay, ready to go. Normally, I always ask to hear stuff beforehand. There's a reason for that, because when I turned up, he'd only got one song. There's one song he'd written, a cover version of Metal by Gary Newman, and 172 bits of music, varying from loops to slightly more involved songs. And so we just kept going through them. And I don't think he wanted to sing at the time very much. So we ended up doing a lot of instrumentally stuff just because I was there. So that meant he had to work.
Right.
So I got to do anything I wanted. You know, we just experimented and messed around. It was, I think people probably think we used to spend forever on sounds, which we didn't. Most sounds would be got pretty quick. And then we'd record it, and we'd blitz these songs for a couple of days or 3 days, put them away, next one. Then about 3 months later, you'd come back and you'd forgotten what you'd done. And every time, fortunately, we just went, wow, that was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So we ended up with all these songs. That's why it's a big album, a long album. And that's why, and some of them, there was no room for vocals by the end of it, because he'd filled all the spaces up with music, and there's no room. So we got some good instrumentals. It was never over. It was the beginning of it's never over till it's over, where we're working on one track, I remember, and it'd gone through a fairly complex instrumental passage and finished, and Trent goes, you know what, we need a marching band playing the riff here. I just thought, really? So yeah, we created a marching band that took about 4 days, and then we put it through a TC program that made it sound like it was from the 30s and was tiny. So we spent all these days making this stuff that sounded great, and it just made it sound tiny. But it was great. It worked really well. And so there was all these songs going that you never knew where they were going to go, or whether they were going to be made the record or not, because we were waiting for vocals, really. And we're kind of getting towards a point of knocking the ones down that we didn't want. And Trent came in one Saturday and said, I want to work on this song. And all it had was bzzz, bzzz. And I just thought, you're fucking kidding me. You know, we've got all these other songs. You want to work on that? Obviously, I didn't say this. He said, I want to do live drums. And I said, okay, I'll give you live drums. And we got a drum sound in 15 minutes, I think. And I thought, I'm going to tune the snare to a comedy tune, because I know this isn't going to see the light of day. So I just by ear tuned it to the track. So it went boing, boing. And Trent started playing the drums. I thought, it sounds pretty good, actually. And ended up, it was the song We're in This Together, which was one of the singles. So I did work out that with Trent, that the more you say that sucks, the more he kicks its ass, or it doesn't.
Right. And were you still cycling through 173 pieces at this point, or?
We chopped at this point. I think we're down to about 35 to 70 range.
Anywhere from 35 to 70, who knows?
Somewhere between there. It's a bit of a blur, but it was actually great fun. We went out cycling a lot. We worked really long hours and really hard, and worked 7 days a week, but it was fun. It was, as an engineer, it was very freeing. You could do any mad idea you wanted to do.
Right. And it was his studio was in a mortuary, is that right? An ex-mortuary?
It was in a funeral home.
Funeral home, yeah. Okay.
And apparently there's only certain things in America. You have to be a certain band to have a certain business in there. So
Oh, right. Yeah, the
this
zoning.
place was cheap, really big, and because nobody wanted it. And that was the only reason he got it. It wasn't because it was in a funeral home.
Okay,
It
so
was
it
just
wasn't
because
an
it
Anne
was
Rice
cheap
thing.
and really great. I think everyone thought, oh, it's very 90s style. There was rumors going around that there were dead bodies upstairs. There
No,
weren't.
they
And
usually clear those out before they sell the funeral home.
the other good thing about a funeral home is nobody actually died there. So there's no weird atmosphere.
Well, that's a
There's nobody
point.
being killed there. They came
Right.
in
So,
afterwards.
unlike
So
everywhere
there's no.
else in New Orleans.
Yes. Well, there was, of course, Downward Spiral was done in the Sharon Tate house.
Yeah.
That was recorded in the house where Sharon Tate got killed. And we were the last people there. It got flattened after we left. And that was okay too. I think they had it exercised. So the atmosphere there was a really nice house. Actually, it was nice. So yeah, so that was the Fragile.
Well,
And
so, but
then we kind of
I just I just wanted to ask about with the Fragile though. So you still have got 35 to 70 things and you finish them. And is this the one that you guys brought Bob Ezrin in to sequence?
yeah.
Now, had you chosen the tracks and you knew which were going on at that point, or were you actually making choices as well?
We picked the tracks. I couldn't. I tried to do it. I couldn't get beyond the first three. I had no idea. I'm actually not very good at running orders for records, and we just really couldn't. We were too close to it. So Trent loved The Wall, so Bob Ezrin came down, did the running orders. It was great. Got to hang out with him for a bit, which was brilliant.
Yeah. So he didn't know him before that.
Nope.
Cold call, come down, sequence this record.
Yeah. That's all you got to do. And it was a buzz. Yeah, it was great.
I mean, I'm curious what it's like to have somebody come in to a project like that, especially. I mean, but with any project, to have someone come in at the very last second and be in this position of, like, they can't, it's not like you're just doing a playback for Bob Ezrin because you think he's great and he's just going to go, yeah, fellas, fantastic, see you later. Like, he has to give opinions. He has to have thoughts about things. It's got to be a little bit scary, too, to have someone come into something you think is done, but you've been that deep inside of for so long.
I think he was picked because Trent thought he'd get it. He said he did get it, or he said he got it. He did a good job, but he felt it out pretty well. I mean, I don't know if it's because there was a gang of us there that like 5 to 1, but yeah, it's funny. I never really thought about it at the time, but now you mentioned it, you're right. I think we were all slightly crazy by that time. Yeah, we were definitely in some Groundhog Day of.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose you get, especially if you've got completion anxiety anyway, which it seems like Trent's got a bit of.
He had that. He cured himself. He got cured after that record.
Right. But so it has to be done. Like, you're not going to go through that and then go, let's work on it some more.
No, it had to be done. And we were happy it was done. Also, I think what happened was the tracks got picked because they were the tracks he got vocals for. That's how they ended up there getting the ones on the album. Because the vocals went on very late on that record.
Right.
Something we've since learned not to do.
Right. Leave a little room.
It seems quite fundamental, but it took us a while to understand that.
Well, I mean, but it was about the writing, right? I mean, that's all it was about. There's no vocal to sing yet, so
it's about making great sounds. So.
Yeah, I mean, and you've worked on a ton of stuff with him since, and then also with Atticus.
Yeah.
So, we're not going to go record by record through the Nine Inch Nails catalog for now. So, but if there's anything else you feel like,
But what happened was, it was on the next record that Atticus became kind of the programmer. Trent had worked with Atticus's band 12 Rounds, which was Atticus and his wife, Claude, and got on with Atticus and started using him as a programmer. And so then it became the three of us. And again, very supportive, very collaborative. Probably the person who's champions me the most to be there is Atticus.
right.
Because Atticus does a lot of the mixing, and every time I get sent stuff to come out, if I do come out to mix, they send me a very, very rough mix, and you listen to it and go, what the fuck am I gonna do?
Right.
So, because Atticus is getting very, 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 very good, and I've taught him all my stuff, and he's learned more stuff before. So, still a challenge again every time you go out, but it's a nice environment to be in with those very creative people.
Yeah. Yeah. Atticus is great. And it feels like, and I could be totally wrong, but I mean, is he spending a lot of time mixing, or this is just they're building the tracks that way?
Well, that's it. It's made up of, it's now become a different creative process that Trent plays like on loop record something for a while, and then Atticus will cut it up. And sometimes it'll be just the part, but sometimes he'll just cut a collage of all the bits up, and then he puts effects on them, like delays, lots of delays and echoes and processing, that the part becomes something different. That's why he's got a writing credit, because he makes parts that weren't there,
Right.
that out of all bits. And so the effects that he puts on them are part of the sound. And so that becomes part mixed. Trent always has to have a good rough mix. He can't have he wants to know what he's got. So it's kind of just evolved from there, really, that half of what Atticus does is the mix as well. So now my role is more kind of just finishing it off, and there's always more recording goes on. So I come in kind of at the end, really, and we just finish it together.
Right.
But it's a unique experience. It's a unique way of working.
So you're sort of the Bob Ezrin of these records now too. You're the closer.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I'm doing a little bit of EQing, which Bob wasn't doing, but I'm coming in much more towards the end. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, it's got to help define their process, because you'd imagine they would just go forever. They could,
They've got a lot better at that. I mean, I think that after the Fragile, certainly Trent dealt with any problems he had doing vocals, and now it's no problem at all. They're there from kind of the beginning. So, yeah, it's just kind of evolved as a process.
Right. So I should know this, but did you work with them on any of their scores as well?
I didn't work on the Oscar-winning one.
Oh, well,
I worked on Dragon Tattoo and Gone Girl.
Right, because you also worked with Clint Mansell, right?
I worked with him when he was in Pop Will Eat Yourself.
Oh, right.
But I didn't really work with him when I was in New Orleans doing the Fragile. Clint moved out. He'd left Pop Will Eat Itself, and Pop Will Eat Itself were on Trent's label, nothing. So they were friends, and Clint was kind of at a bit of a loss what to do, and I think he'd been asked to do a score because he's massively into films for, what was the film? I think it was what's his first score? Oh, my memory's terrible. A very gloomy film. And he was in the roommates. Trent had a little place that had kind of little apartments. And so we used to often go home at night and we'd go through different doors into our apartments, and I'd wake up in the morning and hear the music he was working on coming through the walls. It was, what was it? Requiem for a Dream. That was the film he was doing, I think.
Right.
And so we just hung out a lot. We just hung out a lot together, and but I never worked with him.
All right. Well,
Past,
according to the internet, you worked on the Doom score with him, but apparently not.
I may have done something tiny on the Doom score, but no, not with him. No.
All right. All right. Fair enough. We'll just skip right past that bad information. Well, okay, so there are a couple other bands that you've done a lot with. I mean, I feel like we've mentioned Jesus and Mary Chain a lot, but we haven't really talked about them either. Because I mean, you did the stuff with Flood early on, then Automatic, but you continued to work with them even pretty recently for within their catalog as well. So they keep coming back.
Yeah, I loved working with them. There was just the three of us, and they're two brothers, so they argue. God, do they argue? I got used to it, and I just used to find it funny. But if you ever went to an outside studio, you just see the assistant scuttling away when they'd start going into one. But again, it was very. They were kind of shy. They wanted their own space. Once they got their own studio, they were much better, and it was just very exciting. You know, I kind of learned to program doing Honey's Dead, because both William and I, we'd just got Akai samplers and Cubase. So we were all both learning together about making loops and pitching things and sampling and triggering. And we both had an Oscar bass synth that we used to use for the basses and things. And we kind of both learned how to do it together, really.
Right. So, because they're a common thread from the very beginning. Basically.
Yeah, they were my first kind of. I remember Flood was going to do Violator, and he said, "Do you want to engineer it?" And I'd just been asked to engineer Automatic. And my two favorite bands at the time were Depeche Mode and Jesus and Mary Chain.
Right.
So I picked the Mary Chain, and the good thing is I get to love Automatic. I get to love Violator because I'd had nothing to do with it.
Right. And it's worked out, you know.
Yeah, I can't complain. It was the right decision. It set me on the path of the Valentine's ride. That was the thing that changed my career working.
Right. I'm curious. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's like this at all, but I'm wondering, when you go back to work with a band that you worked with so early on, is there any like weird kind of memory of like what your role and experience were early on and that carries forward, or do you just go in as the Alan Moulder who you are at the moment?
Well, that's a good question. There's always some hierarchy. I think it's quite difficult to work with a band that you've been the engineer to then be the producer, because there's still a bit of viewing you as the engineer that maybe. But with Mary Chain, I was always just the engineer. So it was just kind of three friends going into a studio to make a record.
Right. Right. So, and you could have been given a production credit or not, and that's not what it was.
That was how it was going to be, and fair enough, you know.
Right.
It could only be a co-production credit, but I never really bothered too much about that, the credits side, really. As long as I got engineer, I was happy.
Right, which is good, because now nobody knows anyway, you know. So
I think nobody gets to see anyway, and I think engineer is such an undervalued.
Yeah.
Skill. So certainly now, I mean, but it really is an art. It's a great thing to be incredibly good at. That's what I tell the kids here. You know, don't forget being a great engineer, because everything goes a lot easier if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is definitely, I mean, for years it was always a bit of a lesser position than, you know, obviously producer and mixer. Those are the two big ones, which the engineer's spending more time with the band usually than anybody.
Exactly. Yeah, there would just be that really. You'd just turn up and hopefully you could take up from where you'd left off, or sometimes a band member may not be there and that would be a bit different, or there may be some slightly different balance in the band's chemistry, but you have to just feel it out, don't you?
Right. So, all right. God, there's so much other stuff. I mean, you've mixed a couple Blonde Redhead records, right?
Yes. I mixed 3 tracks off one record because Rich Costy actually couldn't start it, so they wanted me to do 3 tracks. So I mixed 3 tracks, and then I mixed the next record. Yeah.
Right. Well, that'll show Rich Costy not to be late.
Yeah, there you go. Rich and I are friends, so all good.
Yeah. I think on the U2 session that we were both involved in, he was actually at your place.
That's right. For a while he was, until you were the one on the J series, weren't you?
Yeah, I was over at SARM. Yeah.
That's right. So he left my place when he heard your mix on the J series because he thought it sounded much slicker than he needed the J series.
Oh, God, it had nothing to do with the board, believe me. I was the first person to turn a knob on that board in probably 4 years. Like, the assistant didn't know how to patch things because it just never came up.
Kidding me. Well, that sounded like a crazy session from what I heard.
It was pretty nuts. I won't go into too much, but I do want to say, just because, and the guy who was assisting me was great, but he had never, and I was just mixing. I wasn't tracking, but he had never had to do a session like that. And the rule, as you know from working with Bono, is if he might come into the room, you better have a microphone set up because he's going to want to sing. So I had an SM7 in the back of the room, and it was going through a 1073 and an 1176 or something like that because that's my chain all the time. So I'm mixing and I'm realizing like they're so busy tracking over at Abbey Road. There's no way in hell he's coming to SARM. Nobody's coming to SARM. I want to use that 1176. So I asked guy, like, can you just patch that in on this insert? And he obviously got confused because all of a sudden I hear the vocal coming out of the SM7. He'd patched backwards into the SM7 from the insert.
That's amazing.
And it was incredible. It's like, it's a really cool sounding Oratone.
And he made out he'd done it all on purpose.
No, you can't make out that you've done that on purpose. There are plenty of things you could pretend like, hey, I really wanted you to check this out. But no, I didn't want you to hear the vocal coming from behind you. No.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh God, there's so many. Okay, there are 2 other bands that you've done a lot of records with, and Foals is one, and those were with Flood. You did one of those down at La Fabrique, if I'm right.
No, that was. Worked on 3 records with Foals. The first one, Total Life Forever, I mixed. I just mixed that one, and as it often happens, I mix an album, and then Flood and I produced the next one, which we did, and then I mixed the one that was done at La Fabrique.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I loved working with those guys. I remember I went down to Oxford to see them on Total Life Forever doing their demos, and they were all in this, it's like a squat, really. But they're putting all this stuff together, and it's like, wow, students. But there's an intellect and I love that band. I think they're my favorite band in the world now.
Right. I won't tell the other bands, don't worry.
Well, new but newish band. I still think of them as new.
Yeah, well, I mean, they kind of are compared to some of them.
I think they're a really good band anyway. I think I like their ambition, and Yanis is a really smart. They're all really smart guys, but there's a band there. There's a good chemistry between them.
Right. All right. Well, that was quick.
Well, okay. Let me think.
No, I mean,
okay. We can move on then.
Yeah, we don't have to pry anything out of you. It's just interesting. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the Wolf Mother record that Joe engineered with you.
Yep.
There's also you mixed that Saul Williams record
Yeah.
which is an interesting choice. So I'm curious how that came about and what your take was on that.
Well, Trent produced it,
Right.
so I was brought in to mix it. I was really excited to do it because it's a different kind of thing for me to work on. And they'd been working on the record for quite a while together, I think, and it's a different thing for me to do. So that's it, really. It was kind of
Well, you can.
it's always interesting working with Trent when he's producing for somebody else, because he's such an artist that, you know, he does want things his way, and sometimes, and he has to acquiesce to get, you know, when it's somebody else's record.
Right.
Sometimes. That's always interesting.
Well, and it goes along. You've got some really interesting things on your playlists, which there'll be. If Mark hasn't already put the links in the chat, I'm sure he has, because people ask for these things immediately. But I mean, there's Iggy Azalea and 50 Cent in top spots on your list. I'm curious then, while we're talking about sort of going off piste a little bit, why are those tracks in there? For the feel of them, or for the music? Or
I like both of them. That I've kind of fell in love with that Iggy Azalea track, and I just thought the sound of it because it's all based basically around a bass. The drums don't come in for it. And it sounds so massive, and the hooks are really good on it. But
yeah.
I used to play it a lot just because I love the sound of it so much.
And the 50 Cent track, the same thing.
It's Dre. I mean, I love Dre's sound, the sound of Dre's tracks. And I did a bit of consultancy for beats, and I went to one meeting with Trent. We were going to be listening to all headphones, and Trent said, Dre will be listening to in the club. That's all he'll listen to. And it's funny because we turned up to the meeting with Rich Costy, actually, and I'd forgotten about this comment and what he'd said, and I was trying to sort my headphone things out, and I just heard ding ding, and Dre going like this. Right. And you listen to that track, it sounds killer. It's just an amazing sounding track.
Yeah. I've talked to a few different people who worked with him, and they say just as a balance engineer, he is astounding. Like, he just pushes faders up, and it's like, holy shit.
He's got it. We worked on a Nails track on The Fragile with him, and he mixed the track. We didn't use it in the end. I think probably hadn't even finished writing it, probably why. But working with him and seeing how he worked, I couldn't tell how he got what he got out of. He had these Yamahas NS10s on the desk that they were just flapping, you know, when Yamahas implode. I thought, how the hell do you get the bottom end out of hearing that? It was incredible. But an incredibly talented engineer as well as artist and producer, you know.
Yeah.
Incredibly talented.
And headphone mogul.
That's right. So if you wanted to hear something good that sounds good on beats, in the club.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is tuned to that track. That's awesome. Well, I also want to say one of the highlights of my career, other than sneaking into Sound City and bending your ear about Swervedriver for several hours, was on the Duke Spirit record, Bruiser, where you mixed the track. Because I produced that record, and to know that, holy shit, because at first they said, oh, because I'd mixed the whole thing, and they said, well, we're going to have Alan Moulder mix this song. And for about a split second, I was like, wait, hold on, it's going to get remixed. And then, oh, Alan's going to do it. Oh, it's amazing. Right. And then Catherine Marks, who was working still with you at that point, right?
I think she probably was.
Yeah.
She did one as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if there's anything to say about that other than I wanted to bring it up because I was super happy about that.
I loved that band. My wife got me into them, actually. She got their first EP, and we just used to listen to it all the time. I think Leila's got an incredible voice.
Yeah, Leila's amazing.
It's just comes to life. I mean, the band are good, don't get me wrong. I love the whole thing about the band, but as soon as you put the fader up with her voice in, it's like, wow, that's a lead singer, you know.
Yeah. She's the Debbie Harry of now for that band.
Very good.
But it's
And
interesting where I talked to, because I mixed a couple songs on the record before and then produced Bruiser, and you end up talking to a lot of people, the managers, and they were on different labels. There were 2 different labels involved, and there are some people who get it, and some people who are like, "Oh, well, it's all Leela," and like, no, it's not. It's
no.
not. I mean, the slinky jungle beats that are going on behind it, and Toby, and like the noise. That's her milieu that she has to live in.
Yes, and she got the voice that cuts through perfectly.
Yeah.
They were a great band. I thought they should have been much bigger.
Yeah, and it's, again, I think, they're like the mini me in terms of problems, like Swervedriver. They didn't have anything quite that bad, but it was just timing, and things would always take too long, and people would have gone past it by the time it would come out. But I listened to that record, a few days ago, because I was just going through your discography and thought, oh, right, that one. And your mix is much better than any of mine. But it's...
I don't believe that.
I think so. But it's a really fun record. It was great to hear it again.
Great band.
Okay, now we got 2 things we have to talk about. One, we'll start with Them Crooked Vultures. So I'm just going to let you talk about that, because
that was an interesting. Well, I was about to start Wolfmother, that Wolfmother album, and I was in LA doing nails, and I was going to my room. I'd finished with nails for the night. I was just walking, about to go to my door, and through my door, and the phone rang. It was Josh. He says, Moulder, you got to come out. What are you doing? I says, I'm about to go into my room. He said, you got to come over. I've got something I've got to talk to you about. I can't tell you what to talk about it over the phone. It's top secret. You got to come now. Really? Okay. To the Valley? Okay. Where are you? His studio pinged up. He said, yeah, it's top secret. You can't tell anyone. Okay. This sounds good. So I turn up at his studio. I've never been there before. The door opens and there's Josh. He goes, well, I knew him before because I did remixed a couple of tracks that didn't get used to appease the record company. And Josh was never going to use them anyway, but we got on. So behind him was Dave Grohl. I thought, this seems exciting. So
but now you're still taller than both of those guys, right? I just want to...
Not Josh.
Not Josh. Okay, I was going to ask, because he's a very tall man.
He's got the head. So then they said, okay, we're going to do this album with John Paul Jones, from Zepp. And I thought, Jesus Christ. He said, you've got to do it. You've got to engineer it. You're the only person who can engineer it. I said, well, I've just agreed to do this album. He said, you got to cancel it. You got to make it work. So I thought, well, I can't turn this down. But I also really wanted to do Wolfmother because I loved them. I'm a massive fan. So I had to contact their A&R guy and say, I need to be flexible on these times a bit. Can we move back a couple of weeks here? Because I have to do this album that I can't tell you about. And the A&R guy was a guy called Jeff Sosno, and he was brilliant. He just said, yeah, sure, okay, we can make it work. And so we started recording it, and Dave's playing drums. It's fantastic. They'd start off in the morning. They'd come in and they'd sit in the lounge, and they've got no songs. And they'd sit in the lounge on these little, like, cigarette, the cigar box guitars.
Yeah.
The 3 of them, jamming around on those, coming up with an idea. Then they'd go into the room and start playing. And while they were playing, I'd be getting the sounds. Then I get the drum sound. And that sounds quite good. And Josh would go, too big in this room, move the drums into the small room. So you have to move everything and set that up again. And then Josh is quite hands-on as a producer and engineer. He's got a very distinct sound. So it started being I'd do my thing as much as I could, but have to be prepared for it all to go up in the air, which more often than not it did. And then they'd just write a song, they'd jam it out, and then at the end of the day, you kind of got a backing track. So that was very exciting. And I remember I had to leave the studio after the first break, after we finished most of the tracking. I left the studio, went straight to the airport and flew to Australia to start pre-prod on Wolf Mother. And then we did some recording with Wolf Mother, and then I got to mix it before I went to mix Wolf Mother, I think.
Right.
It was crazy again. Dave was drinking so much coffee at the time that I think he just had a kid. He was doing the early shift with the kids.
Right.
So he was getting hardly any sleep. So he's just jacked up on coffee all the time. Dave's pretty full on.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think that's the era from that video he did, Two Pots. There's fresh pots.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was not exaggerated in the slightest.
No, if anyone hasn't seen that, just look for Dave Grohl Fresh Pots, and it's him out of his mind on caffeine.
That was an intense session, and long nights, because Josh would do guitars at night, and I'd be going into the bathroom doing press-ups to keep myself awake. I'm like, okay, more guitars.
That's funny. Everyone else was going into the bathroom to do blow, but you're doing press-ups.
So, yeah, it was again an arty record. I remember John Paul Jones pulled out this 10-string bass, and I trying to get a sound. I said, like, you got to help me here, John, because I've got no fucking clue what it's meant to sound like.
And was it a 5-string doubled, so like a King's X kind of thing?
Kind of. It didn't sound much like a bass. It was very unusual sounding.
Did you get him to use a Steinberger instead?
I tried, but he wouldn't do it. He looked cool.
You carry one with you, don't you? Because they're small, you know.
They don't make them anymore. You can't get them. It's hard. But no, it's funny. There's a great arguments going on because Josh doesn't like anything new. And John had this new amp. I can't remember what make it was. His gear, John's all gear, it was brand new. And Josh kept trying to get him to use this old amp head. And John would go, they're shit. All the old amps were shit anyway. We only use them because that's all we had. This is much better.
I love that. It's like, no, you need to use what they used in Zeppelin. Like, hold on. Yeah. What?
Exactly. Josh kept trying. He did get his way on a couple of tracks, I think. But John Paul Jones put up a good argument.
Yeah.
Dave would in jest say, he'd get lunch or something. Dave would get lunch and say, I was in Nirvana. And John Paul would go, I was in Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, you can't, like, you're done.
Yeah, Josh and I just look at each other. Yeah, it was in jest, I hasten to add.
Yes, of course. Though the caffeine can make you do some very odd things.
Exactly.
Well, look, let's now talk about Zeppelin. I have, I think, 5 exclamation points after it on my list.
All right, yeah.
But How the West Was Won. Let's just, because the story of that coming together is kind of insane.
It was one of the most surreal days of my life. It was, I was doing Foals with Flood. We were recording Total Life Forever. And Zeppelin, they had different managers. And at that time, Peter Mensch, who managed Foals, was managing Jimmy Page. And Peter Mensch said, they've got this live concert, which had been 7 years before or something. And he said, we can't get it mixed because it's been mixed and Jimmy's not happy. I think it had been mixed by somebody else, maybe.
Well, I think it was mixed by Mick and Roy, who had done the live sound, and they had just done Like they'd cleaned things up, but I don't think
think
they meant it to be a record mix. It was like, it's presentable, because there was no plan to put it out, but it had been filmed with 16 cameras. So like, somebody's going to put that together.
Well, he wasn't happy about something. And I don't know if he thought it was a mix or it wasn't, but I think obviously the guitars weren't loud enough, I think. So they said, Peter Main said, would you be up for it? And I said, you fucking kidding? It's the reason I'm in this job. As a teenager, I had a poster of Jimmy Page with his 12 neck, twin neck that I used to worship, and play my guitar to, hoping I could be anywhere near. So he was a god to me. And so one day the phone rang and it was, hello, Alan, Jimmy Page here. It's not every day you get those phone calls.
No, especially when you think it's Dave Grohl putting on an accent.
So he liked me apparently because he'd never heard of me. So he thought that I obviously didn't blow my own trumpet too much. So I got in because he hadn't heard of me. And I knew Robert. I'd met Robert because my wife actually sang backing vocals on one of his solo albums when she was like 15 or something. And of course I knew John from Crooked Vultures. So I got asked to do this, and the multi-tracks came in, and the two guys had they'd done all the hard work. They'd notched all the feedback frequencies out of the crowd, like automated it all. They'd done loads of great work on it. They'd done all the vocal processing effects that I got heard. Robert likes the vocal effects, so I was kind of stick to those. Add a bit of your own, but first track was started at the beginning. First track was Good Times, Bad Times, and Jimmy said, I got a phone call from Jimmy. I'll come down about 4:00. I thought, okay.
That's not very much time.
I probably won't be that far on. Okay, I'll come down anyway. So he came down and he listened to where I was at. And as I was going out, I was thinking, this sounds shit. And he sat there, I could tell he was like, I said, well, I'm not really that far into it, Jimmy, maybe you should come back tomorrow. So I got him to come back the next day, and I worked really late on it, got it, and he listened to that and go, oh, that's different, that's more like it. And we went from there. And it was amazing. I got to spend that summer hanging out with Jimmy Page in the studio every day. He used to come down. He used to love coming down, and he would have it on the screen there, and he'd be listening to the music, and he'd be stood here doing his Jimmy Page moves, kind of air guitar. And it was, for a Zepp fan, it was incredible. Every time he left, I used to have at least half an hour recovery period where all I could do is drink tea and recover, because his presence is so immense.
Right.
And at the end of it, the three of them came in. I did think while I was mixing it, Jason needs to sound as good as he can. So I spent a lot of time trying to make, not that the sounds weren't there, they were there and the drumming was there, but big boots to fill. So I took that responsibility. He wasn't there, so I took the responsibility of filling that role as much as I could to do that. And then when it's finished, the three of them came down. Again, it was a Friday, and they all sat here watching it and listening to it while I sat at the back rocking.
Oh,
it was about the most stressful day of my life, I think. It was. Did they like it? Did they like it? So I got away with it anyway.
And did they listen all the way through before you got any feedback?
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's a long time to sit.
Yeah, rocking. Yeah, it was intense. And it was, when you get to work on Kashmir and things, those songs that you grew up with, and Stairway to Heaven. I remember texting my wife and go, Jimmy Page is just okayed my Stairway to Heaven mix. Doesn't get better than that.
And she said, pick up some eggs and milk on your way home.
Yeah, all right, get home. So yeah, that was, we did all that. We mixed it all in here. And then Caesar, this is when Caesar started working for me. He was the intern then. And his job would be at night doing stems of I'd probably doing 2 tracks a day to 3 tracks a day.
Because it had to be done really fast, right? It was like 3 weeks or something crazy.
It's crazy. You think, why have you waited this long and now I've got a ridiculous amount of time to do it? So I had to crack a hell of a pace. So I'd work from 12 till about 1 in the morning. Caesar would stem all the tracks that I'd done. And I had John Catlin working with me. He'd be doing the prep work next door. And then we'd have the stem so we could do the 5.1, which we did in the overdub booth as it was then, which is now Caesar's Palace, Caesar's studio. And so I'd be starting, John would be starting the 5.1 mixes as I was still doing the stereo mixes. And then we'd came together and did the 5.1s.
Right.
So we managed to get it done on time. I think we were 2 days early.
Wow.
So,
and it sounds amazing. It's great. And I also, did you mix? Because there's on the DVD, there's also the kind of tech run through show as well. Did you mix that one, or did they just leave yeah, okay. Because
I do want to say though that those guys, I would never have been able to do it if they hadn't done all that work.
Right. And I don't know for sure who did all of that prep work, but I want to mention Roy, because unfortunately he died earlier this year. So, but beautiful guy, was Robert's front of house guy forever. And he had the gig to do the live sound at that concert and realized, like, no, I'll just take care of Robert's vocal. And he brought in Mick from Metallica's camp to do the band. And so Roy Williams one of the most generous guys I've ever met. And he lived, 10 minutes from me. So.
Well, if he was involved in it, thank you very much, Roy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's obviously a million other records we can talk about. If there's anything in particular you want to bring up, that's obviously great. But we've talked about Caesar. We've talked about basically this gigantic community that you now have, which is rivaling the group that was at Trident back in the day and at the Townhouse back in the day. And it seems to be very much built on that model of having a building full of studios where people cross-pollinate and learn and come up through the ranks. But then instead of them going out on their own, you rent them a room and they stay there. So
yeah, we're very lucky that, I think Flood and I were trying to recreate that thing that we had at Trident. And so once we got this place with 2, like the tracking room, which used to be kind of Flood's room, in my room, we got these guys that just became our guys, and they stuck with us. And if they can work with both of us, we're very different to work with, and not the easiest either, I must say. If they can work with, but we come from polar opposite views sometimes. So if they can work with both of us, it's a good grounding. So we've been very lucky that they just kind of stick around. Catherine's still got a room down the corridor. Caesar's next door now. John, who has just come back, John Catlin, who I worked with on Zeppelin, and that was pre-Caesar. Post-Catherine, pre-Caesar, he's just taken a room upstairs. We've got another couple of kids. We've got Richie and Tom, who are starting off the engineering. Well, they're engineering Richie's starting producing, Richie Kennedy. And there's another guy, Cecil Bartlett, who works with, I haven't really worked much with Cecil, but was Flood's guy for a long while. They're all really talented boys and girls, and they kind of do, there's a good family vibe here that people seem to feel that. Again, you got support.
Right.
You got, if you got, it's like you got a problem or something's a bit of a sketchy moment, you can go out and you can just talk to somebody about it, and they might go, "Oh, have you tried this. And
Right.
it's just, sometimes it's just nice. It may not work, or it may work. So there's a support system that we try to give to all of them.
Which is great.
To be honest, it's one of the best things about the job for me, that both Flood and I love about this place, is seeing the people take off. I mean, Catherine won Producer of the Year, which was amazing, you know.
Yeah,
So,
and that was the year after she won Engineer of the Year, right?
that's right.
I think she just flew right. MVG's out of awards for her now.
Yeah, she's got it all.
And she came specifically to work with Flood, right?
She came over. She met Flood in Ireland, and she was in Australia and she just qualified as an architect.
Right.
And she played in bands, and she said to Flood, I really want to work in studios. Can I come and make tea for you? And he said, okay. And she turned up one day, and Flood was, he rode her hard in terms of what he expected. And he, to a point that I thought, wow, you're really busting her balls. But she stuck in, she put it in, and she learned a shit ton with him. And then when my assistant was leaving, I asked her to work with me, because I thought it would be a good different discipline for her working with me. And very quickly, I noticed she'd definitely got what it took to be a mix engineer. And I said to her, have you ever considered being a mix engineer? Because at the time, I think she was wanting to be writing and producing, and one of these pop songwriter type thing. And I said, just do me a favor. For a year, just think of yourself as a mix engineer and see what happens. And she's become kicker. I'll tell you, I would dread being in a mix off with Catherine. Every time I walk past her drawer, the thing is that the sound leakage in our studios are terrible. So there's just noise coming out of all rooms. Every time I walk past her door, I can think, how'd you get those drums to sound like that?
Well, I've spent my whole career saying that about your records, so that's all right.
I don't think so.
Well, I think so. And I think it's really great that because obviously it serves you to have these people around, but at the same time that you're not thinking about just, running them dry and then throwing them out and getting another one. It is about nurturing and bringing them on. And the fact that they stick around, it really says a lot about you guys.
Well, it's a tough industry, isn't it, we're in now, and so if you have somewhere you feel kind of safe, or it helps your confidence and it helps you do good work, I think. So it's very, very rewarding. Caesar just won Breakthrough Engineer of the Year.
Yeah.
So that was another back of the net. So very happy.
Yeah. You're going to own all of the awards soon. Well, I think we can bring Mark on for some questions if you're up for that. There's a million other things I could mention, but then I'm just mentioning records. So
can I have a 30-second break to just go to the bathroom?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks. I'll be back in.
All right.
Right.
Perfect.
And then bring Mark on.
We'll bring Mark on. I think Mark's going to come on now. I could do a dance or something. No, I can't.
I'm going to pretend I'm not here just in case that'll happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's definitely not going to happen.
See, 1 second.
Yeah, you got to put your trousers back on.
Yep.
So we didn't mention Gary Newman's Secret Machines. There's so much stuff. The discography is sort of insane. Absolutely insane. And the playlists are great, too.
Yeah, definitely. I'll repost those in the chat.
Great. There he is.
Hello.
The man himself. See, this is what happened. We always tell people use the facilities before we start because you're not going anywhere. This is what happens when you don't take advantage of that.
They always think that it's not going to be long.
No, exactly. Well, we're at a very respectable 2.5 hours now. It's not.
It is, yeah.
Not too nuts.
Okay. So here are the playlists again for everybody in the Crowdcast chat room.
Great.
If you're not in the Crowdcast chat room, you can get there by going to crowdcast.io and looking for Andrew Talks to Awesome People.
And otherwise, they'll be on the YouTube playback of this, definitely.
Yeah. Yep.
While we're waiting, so 2 little bits of news. We are still almost ready to start having these come out as podcasts. There's just stuff getting worked out, so that is going to happen. And also the second episode, I'm sure people know, but if they don't know, the second episode of Between Two Shores, where I'm being a total dick to Tony Maserati, is out now. So please check that out.
Yes.
All right.
Awesome.
He's back. I'm back.
Cool.
I would imagine there's some questions.
There are some questions. This has been incredible. Thank you guys so much for both of your time. That's awesome. Okay. So Alan, how it works, we're on a platform called Crowdcast where people can submit their questions and then they can upvote each other's questions. So we kind of have like a tiered ranking system. So we just kind of go down from the most voted. So our top upvoted question.
Mark tells you that because basically that takes the blame off of him if you don't like the question. It's the most popular question.
Totally just exposed me.
He's co-producing with the chat. It's not his fault.
Yes. Nice.
I get it.
I like it. Awesome. Okay. So the top one is from IL, and he says, "Hi, Ellen. Can you talk about your master bus philosophy? Specifically, I'd like to know how you chose your settings on the Obsidian. I mean, how do you decide attack and release times, ratio, etc.? Thanks."
Okay. On the Obsidian, I tend to have it on the same setting pretty much all the time. I hate to admit this. I tend to have it on 10-1 with the second slowest attack time and either auto release or the fastest attack time. And I have the high pass function in generally, and it barely moves. I have a Manly very Mew first. The first thing I have is this inward connections knob, which is basically their modeling of an API mix bus, apparently, which I just use that and it just sounds nice. Just sounds quite nice. And then I run it through the very Mew, which again, the meters don't move. I'm just basically running it through the circuitry. And that's either on the slowest release time or the next slowest. And then the Obsidian. And lately I haven't been putting an EQ on, but sometimes I have a GML and sometimes I have the inward connections, EQ, backrack EQs, which generally just usual stuff, really, a little bit of top and a little bit of bottom, kind of thing. But nothing much extreme. In the box, I'll use ozone to get the level up, and a little bit of EQ and compression. But when I'm on the analog desk, it's not a great deal, really.
And when you transfer from being on the desk to being in stems, because that's kind of the process if you're mixing on the desk, do you switch stereo buses or do you go back out analog through the analog?
Same one. We've got the same setup next door in Caesar's room, so I can flip between rooms, and they both have exactly the same stuff on the mix bus.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Amazing. Okay. This next one's great. This is from Orb Kills Altars, and he says, "Alan, you fucking mutant, you. Okay. Can you perhaps talk about your philosophy on using stereo phase and panning to get the 3D sound you're after, specifically in dense productions that are heavy/aggressive, but also melodic and lush?" And he says, "I think I've just summed up your entire discography. And do you think you'd be able to mix something like that entirely in the box, since you did in the box mixing on deviations that way? XOXO."
Oh, that's so sweet. Philosophy. I don't really tend to have a philosophy. So I'm one of those guys that just, I'm slow at mixing. I'm not one of these 4-hour guys at all, unfortunately. I wish I was. I tend to be one of those guys that just fiddles around until things sound good. I wish I could say something a lot more exciting than that. I'll use various trickery to get things wider, whether it's the classic dry sound on the left, slightly delayed modulated sound on the right. Panning, just work on panning things, all different areas, just find the sweet spot. I use, sometimes there's the SSL, which I have the stereo ones that has the extra wide button I can put in that sometimes makes things extra wide. I'm very careful to make sure it still works in mono though. I've got a mono Orotone it's the only speaker that seems to not change in my studio, and I don't want anything to disappear from that. So I'm going to make sure that that works. In the box, it's almost easy, I'd say, because you've got so many plugins that you can use to do that with, like the Waves imager and the what else? There's the Air one. I just pick one that I haven't used for a while sometimes. Just trial and error is basically, unfortunately. You trying to find a place for your last fader can take ages, but I just keep trying things out until it kind of works to me. I hope that's not too disappointing.
I don't think that'll be disappointing at all. And I think panning is overlooked. People are always looking for a plugin or a box, but getting your panning right is huge.
It makes such a difference. I mean, to the level and where it sits, and certainly with guitars. I mean, yeah, it's exactly. It's an overlooked skill, and the difference between 10 and 1%, the percentage makes a big difference.
Yeah, and EQing too. I mean, if you know you've got a really dense mix, why would you push up the entire frequency range of a guitar? Just push up the bit you want to hear. It's like a fader, but it's only at a certain frequency. And I think people don't think about EQ that way. They want to get the sound, and now they have to somehow shoehorn that into the mix instead of...
Yeah, that's a very good point. Take out what you don't need. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so this next question is kind of along the same lines, but there's a good part here at the end of it. So this is from Gonzalo, and he says, Alan, I love your work. How do you achieve that clarity in your mixes where you can distinguish almost every sound and at the same time it feels cohesive? Is that your goal or just the way that you hear music?
I think it's just the way I hear it. I don't really intellectualize. And I've worked with some engineers who do intellectualize and it works really well. I'm not that smart. It's just, I have what I want it to sound like in my head, and I just keep battering away at it until I get there, kind of, or until I find it okay, until I can deal with it, because nobody likes their own work that much, I don't think. I mean, you always think that it could be, or I always think it could be better, and I just keep working away until I feel comfortable that it sounds. I want things to be clear, and I think it's just taste. I think it's just making it sound okay to me is kind of what pushes me on, because I don't find many things okay. I kind of have to kind of really try very hard. I put a lot of hours into it.
Yeah.
But I think, like, when you were talking about the Smashing Pumpkins record, where you didn't intellectualize it in a way, but you changed what you thought the goal of the mix had to be.
Yes, that's what I adapted. Yeah, it's kind of like a light went on of, the bar. There's a higher bar,
right?
And there's always a bloody higher bar. That's the trouble.
And when you say that you hear it in your head, I'm only asking you this because I've always tried to figure out how the hell my brain is working. And I feel like sometimes there's a very specific sonic thing, like, oh, that'll be great if the drums were that really squishy thing or whatever. But usually it's just how the moment's going to feel or how the drums are going to feel. And sonically, it could end up being something that like surprises me, but I'm okay with it because it does what I want. I'm wondering, are you hearing things more sonically, or is it more just about the way they're going to work together?
I think it is sonically. I think that's kind of where I come from. And I think it has to feel right, although I don't know what right is. It's just what feels right to me. And it's an odd one. I really don't know. It's kind of, you should hear the amount of stuff that doesn't make the mix. You know, it's like, I wish it was, okay, that works. No, it's generally, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Fuck, that doesn't work. What am I going to do now? You know, there's a lot of trial and error.
Right.
There's a lot of error. But, so, yeah. It's hard to decide what you do, isn't it? You know, it's kind of when it's kind of a visceral thing that you just, and then also I think some days you'd mix the same track a completely different way on a different day.
Absolutely. For me, I'm building on reaction after reaction after reaction to what I'm hearing, and it all stemmed from whatever I happened to do first.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
it tends to be, I tend to do my best work when I'm in a bad mood.
Really?
Yeah, oddly enough, it spurs me on, and it works a lot quicker when I'm in a bad
So
mood.
what do you do to get yourself into a bad mood? You got anyone in particular you call, or?
Cecil says he sometimes does things on purpose to put me in a bad mood
Because he wants to go home.
Brave boy, but it's just sometimes I get frustrated when you're working on a track and it's not working. Then I get in a bad mood, and then it'll start to work.
Wow.
Because you stop, you just get, fuck this. Oh, sounds all right. You know, one's a pat, you know, he's probably been pussing and footing around it too much.
So funny.
So,
yeah. Awesome. I wonder if
that answers
Andrew,
your question. Good.
Yes. Andrew, if you were going to get in a bad mood, would it be your Between Two Shores persona while mixing?
No, I have to think way too hard to do that. Being mean subtly is really difficult, actually. It takes a lot of concentration, as it turns out. So I've got a question, and it's about Flood. I'm hoping we'll get Flood to do one of these, and I'm going to make you ask him for me.
I'll work on it.
But I don't want the origins of the nickname. I just want to know if you can confirm or deny that in the studio we worked at before Trident, his nickname was Flood, but there was another assistant whose nickname was Drought.
It wasn't me.
No, I didn't think it was you. But was there somebody whose nickname was Drought?
It was Flood and Drought, yes.
Oh, God, that's amazing.
I'd been accused of being Drought before.
No.
I'm not Drought.
I never, ever thought that you would be Drought. It never even entered my mind. Okay.
It was about making tea.
It was about making tea. Okay. There you go.
I can't remember if it's New Order that came up with the name. Because it was night shift. You do the night shift, and when you're on the night shift, you either deal with the fatigue by keeping working or sneaking off and trying to get a kip here and there. One kept working and made tea every half an hour, and one didn't.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm sorry that you thought I was accusing you of being Drought.
I didn't.
It never entered my mind.
Everybody out there. I'm not.
All right, but back to the real questions.
All right.
You got time for a couple more?
Yeah, cool.
Great.
Cool. All right, so this one's from Sebastian, and he says, Alan, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I want to ask, what's your take when mixing acoustic and electronic, sometimes crazy ones, in the song, like different elements in the song to make them so punchy with grip, but not covering all the space inside the mix? Love your work.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. difficult one, really. I think I've covered it. It's just there's no plan. It's just where you can fit it, and I don't compress massively unless thing that I'm generally quite shy on just out compressing things. Somebody point out something that I've squished to fucking death. Fair enough, but I try not to go to that as a go-to kind of thing. I try and do it quite subtly, like I say, unless I want to use a dynamite or something that's going to be very exciting. So if it's acoustic stuff, I'll probably try and keep it quite pure or something, but it varies from track to track. I've seen people who use the same kind of template for mixes. If I could do that, I'm sure I would, but I've never managed to make it work. So, yeah, another not very interesting answer, I'm afraid.
No, I think it's important, though, because it's, especially when you're learning, you really want to sort of have things you can go to and things to think about. And it's tough to get the concept of you have to think about everything all at once. And because it's everything, it's always different.
Yeah, I remember when I was starting off, I kept looking for that bit of gear or those speakers, the thing that was going to solve all my problems. I've just realized there isn't. You just got to keep trying and working away at it. And I do think that it may be a bit easier now because everyone's got the same plugins pretty much, and there's presets to go through. But it's good to free yourself from that and just fiddle around and see what you can come up with, isn't it? Rather than, I'm sure everybody does that too, but. No rules.
Yeah, and I think it's also, like you say, you don't have a template, but your studio is your template. Like, the gear. If you hear something in your head, you'll know where to go. And like, I've got a template for mixing in the box, but it's just, the tools are there for me to grab quickly.
You're going to be grabbing them anyway. Yeah, that's true. I could do a template in the box. And I've Caesar preps the mixes, so there is kind of a template there.
Yeah, but the template is that in your head, you know what all the stuff in that room does.
That's true. It's just trying to get it so that we like it, isn't it?
Yes. There's the rub.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, should we do one more?
Yeah. Let's see. This is a really good question. This is, I'm not sure how to pronounce this one. Bill Linda Dallas. We'll say it's B from Dallas. Okay. So Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy was such an amazing album. I remember on release that it was quite out there and experimental with the sounds and feel. Was there any worry from the record company before the release that it was too different? It sounds fearless.
That's a very good question. We were left to do what we wanted. We had a great A&R guy called Mark Williams who went on to do very, very well, and he would come down and he'd listen to what we're doing, but he trusted us and Billy implicitly. So occasionally he'd make a suggestion, but very, very occasionally. Billy always ignored it. And I think he learned from that to just let it be what it was. And I think we were lucky. I think they probably felt they were lucky. They knew we got singles. So that probably took some pressure off. So I think once they knew that they got, more than one single. I mean, then one of the last songs we did was 1979. So that was Billy saying we haven't got enough singles, and came in with that one day. So that was just like a thank you very much.
Yeah, that worked out.
Yeah, that worked. And so I think, but a lot of the best records a lot of the really successful records I've worked on have had very little A&R input. They've picked the when we worked, Flood and I worked with the Killers. The first album was really big. We were doing the second one, and we were just left alone pretty much. You know, we had support. It wasn't that we ignored the people were there, but they trusted us, which was made life a lot easier.
Yeah. Are you finding the same thing that I am, where there are very few actively A&R'd records now, that bands are almost always making the records themselves and then it's practically a license deal, or are you still seeing label involvement in the same way?
It's more the way you're saying it. Managers seem to have more input than they used to have, probably because they're bridging, sending it to the record companies. Still some A&R, still a bit, but definitely a lot of what you say, that bands doing it themselves.
Right.
It's generally a good thing. I mean, I never understood people who signed bands and then wanted to completely change them.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I love that song. Just make it completely different.
Exactly. And also hiring people and not letting them do what they do. It tends to get the best results out of people if you let them, make them feel confident and can do what they do best.
Yeah.
Which is why
And on that note,
yeah, we're done.
We've done it. Fantastic.
That was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alan. This has been really great. And when people are allowed to leave their houses again, I'm going to come and bug you in London, because
please do.
I need to.
Please, it's been a long time since we've seen each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll finally meet Catherine, because I've never actually met her in person.
You've never
so
met her?
No. And I met Flood really briefly at the MPG Awards, actually, when he won for the PJ Harvey record. But yeah, very briefly. So I'd love to have a chat too. So I will come down and someone will make tea.
They will indeed. And I will see Flood tomorrow, and I'll pass on.
Excellent. Yeah, please do. Please do. All right. Well, I'm going to go to the thanks for watching screen, unless someone has anything they need to add. Are we all good?
All good.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll all just wave goodbye.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks.